We got Bama, we got Michigan, a historic clash at a historic stadium, of course, and it's the college football playoff. We got Gary Harris here, WVUA out of Tuscaloosa. He's been sports director there for a long, long time and does a phenomenal job, and we so much appreciate Gary stopping by. Gary, how you doing?
Doing well, Mark. Always good to be with you, man.
Absolutely. Put into terms, based on your myriad of experiences in these kind of situations, the magnitude beyond what we're going to see on the field, the magnitude of the programs, the historic nature, the legacy, the location. If you throw all this together, it's difficult to surpass this one.
It is. It's an iconic game, no doubt. Just to be for Alabama to be in the Rose Bowl. There's a lot of talk about the BCS National Championship game out in Pasadena following the 2009 season, but that was the BCS National Championship game. It wasn't technically the Rose Bowl. And then a couple years ago, Alabama played in the Rose Bowl, or 3 years ago. But remember, it was moved to Arlington, Texas, to AT&T Stadium because of COVID. And the interesting thing there, Alabama, played in the game, but it wasn't in Pasadena. So this is actually the first time for Alabama to be in the Rose Bowl game in a long, long time. And of course, Alabama's history is tied to the Rose Bowl. It's kind of the team that kind of put Southern football on the map. When following the 1926 season, they upset Washington, traveled across country on the train, and Wallace Wade's team, won the national championship and kind of established Southern football as right there with the Midwest and the East Coast and the West Coast as a dominant region for college football. So then you add in Michigan, the all-time winningest team in terms of wins. Alabama's number 2. You look at all the national championships between the teams, and you look at the coaches. Both have NFL experience. Of course, Nick Saban's the greatest coach, I think, in college football history. And Jim Harbaugh certainly has done an incredible job getting Michigan back to this point. And this is their 3rd straight year in the college football playoff. So you tie all that in, number 1 versus number 4, spot in the national championship game on the line, and I think it's about as big as it gets, Mark.
And you bring up Jim Harbaugh's success at Michigan. He's done an outstanding job. They were having a lull in their history before he got there. Then he took them a while, but he got past Ohio State and to the top of the Big Ten. He's had postseason success in the NFL. Mm-hmm. He's had a lot of success at Stanford, at San Francisco, of course, in the NFL, and has taken the team to a Super Bowl. So he knows how to prepare a team. However, his postseason success has not come at Michigan. Nick Saban, on the other hand, his is nearly unprecedented. It has taken, as you well know, Gary, better than I do, a monumental effort, whether that's Trevor Lawrence in Clemson, whether that's Deshaun Watson in Clemson, whether it's that Ohio State team that was just loaded with NFL superstar kind of talent. It has taken that type of a historic team and effort to beat Nick Saban.
Yeah, it really has. Most of the time when Alabama loses a game, it's epic. You're right, whether it's in the playoff or the regular season. And also you've got the fact that Alabama has never gone more than 3 years under Saban without a national championship. And this is the 3rd year since they won it in 2021, or won it for the 2020 season. They lost, of course, to Georgia following the 2021 season. So for them to keep that streak intact, they've got to win this game against Michigan, because this is the 3rd year without one. They're in the playoff. And for Michigan, I think, talking to some Michigan people, they feel like this is their time. You mentioned Harbaugh's lack of success in the postseason at Michigan. This is the 3rd straight trip to the college football playoff semifinals. 2 years ago, they got run pretty good by Georgia. Then last year, they got stunned by TCU. A lot of guys are back from those teams. This is a veteran, experienced football team with a lot of guys that could have left that came back for this reason. And they're back for a 3rd straight year. So I think a lot of the Michigan people feel like this is their time, whether it's Alabama or anybody else. They're 13-0. They're undefeated for the 2nd straight year going into the college football playoff. I think they feel like they learned by getting their butts kicked against Georgia, and then learned from what happened last year to them when they were stunned by TCU. And I think they feel really, really good about where they're at. And we know Alabama's going to be confident. Mark, as you alluded to, there's not a better postseason coach in the history of college football than Nick Saban. They expect to be here. They expect to win. So you've got, 2 really strong programs focused on the same thing, and only one can advance. So I think it's going to be a great football game.
Well, we finally got a couple great semifinal games last year, but typically we have seen blowouts more so than not. And I think one of the major reasons is not necessarily that we would have seen those same two teams match up and the conclusion to be a blowout in the regular season. But once you add in the laser focused nature of the playoff, the intensity, all of that, that the elite talent of one team rises above the other time and time again. And of course, that's on the side of Alabama. And Michigan, really good team, loaded with NFL players. But if you believe in the recruiting rankings and the talent difference, there is a difference.
Yeah, I think Alabama, top to bottom, is more physically talented, Mark. I would agree with that. I'm not saying they're a better football team, though. I think that Michigan is plenty talented enough. And with the way they play in all three phases, I think that is a team that is on the same page and has been on the same page all season. That's not the case for Alabama. This Alabama team, we know where they started after losing to Texas in game number 2. Didn't play Milroe against South Florida. Had a really, even though they won the game, a horrible performance down in Tampa. And they just kind of got better as they went along. And I think Michigan started the season as a great team, finished the season as a great team, reminds me of some of the Alabama teams that Nick Saban has had. This Alabama team has been more of a work in progress, but a lot of the young players that were struggling early have come together, and clearly what Milroe's done has been phenomenal. So I do give the talent edge to Alabama overall, but I think Michigan's really talented, and I just think Michigan as a team, I do think they're probably, out of all the teams in the country, probably the team that has the best chemistry or symmetry or continuity or whatever you want to call it, as far as where they started the season at, how they navigated through the season to get to this point. So I think that balances it out. And I think that's probably why Michigan's a slight favorite in the game. Las Vegas is going to set those odds where they feel like they can get an equal amount of play on both sides. And the fact that they set Michigan as a slight favorite coming out of the championship games, conference championship games, and Michigan's still a slight favorite, that tells me that there's a belief out there that Michigan can win the game just as much as Alabama can win it. And I agree with that. I think Michigan's fully capable of winning this game. I think for Alabama to win, Alabama's got to play really, really well. And then I think they can win the game. But if they don't play their best, Michigan will beat Alabama. Michigan's plenty good enough to beat Alabama unless Alabama plays well. And the same probably on the other side, too. If Michigan has a bad game, Alabama, you can expect to win the game, too. But if both these teams play well, let's assume both teams play their best. I think it goes down to the fourth quarter, and I think maybe then Alabama wins a really close game. But I have a ton of respect for Michigan and what they've accomplished this year.
And maybe the new component in college football that we now need to take into account when making those talent comparisons, because you could just go to the 247 Sports Composite, and you're basically going to see a reflection of the playoff because those are the teams that make it. But Michigan obviously has been really aided by the transfer portal, and they have gained experienced talent to supplement their recruiting, which is good, but not on the level of an Alabama. So this Alabama team, though, that showed up in Atlanta against Georgia, what impressed me about that game was, sure, the final score was a 3-point game, but Alabama grabbed that 2-score lead, and they never relinquished it. They kept control of that game, and it wasn't like Georgia had the ball and Bama had to stop them. Bama had the 1-score lead, kept the ball the final 3 minutes. They really outplayed Georgia, and that was a significant and just not a significant win, of course. It was really a statement game.
It was the biggest win in college football this season. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Texas at Alabama was a huge win. Michigan over Ohio State. There have been some other, Washington beating Oregon twice. There have been some big wins in college football, but that was the biggest win. You're right, Mark. You're talking about a team that hadn't lost a game in 2 years. The last time Georgia lost was to Alabama in the SEC championship game a couple of years ago. And for Alabama to go in there, and you rightfully described it, they controlled the game. They were up 10 at the half. Georgia never came back and took the lead. Even after Georgia scored that late touchdown to make it a 3-point game, Alabama knelt it down. I mean, they got the ball back and they ran out the clock with Milroe. They did not want to kick it back to Georgia and give Georgia an opportunity. And you're right, when Georgia had to get a stop, even then, late in the game, they couldn't do it. So I thought that day the best team won. I think it's a testament to the program that Nick Saban's built, that when in a season where a lot of people counted Alabama out, and that was the case. I mean, following the Texas game and following that South Florida game, I'm here on the ground, feet on the ground. I covered it. A lot of people picked Alabama to lose to Ole Miss. A lot of people picked Alabama to lose to Texas A&M. A lot of people picked Alabama to lose to Tennessee. People picked Alabama to lose to LSU. And they navigated through all those games. And then, of course, the 4th and goal from the 31-yard line at Jordan-Hare to win that game. And it's kind of what we've seen from Saban. You get to that point, and then when your best is needed, they came up with their best game of the year. It wasn't probably the prettiest game of the year for Alabama, but it was their best game when you consider who they were playing, where they were playing them at in Atlanta, and what was at stake. Alabama came through and, as you said, controlled that football game. They controlled that game on the line of scrimmage, and the best team won. So they're clearly now feeling good about their team and who they are and where they've come from. And I do think, though, there's a ton of respect for Michigan. I mean, when I look at Michigan, like I said, Mark, I mean, offense, defense, special teams, they're solid in every area. In fact, statistically, I think Michigan's the best defense in the country when you take into account points allowed, total defense. I think they've scored more defensive touchdowns than anybody in the country. On offense, I think Blake Corum is a guy that just moves the chains. You know what I mean? I mean, he's not the biggest guy, but he's a downhill runner. He's a great in the red zone. And then J.J. McCarthy, I thought he was probably better early in the year, but he's a guy that can make plays. I remember, last year against TCU, he made plays all over the field. He wasn't why that Michigan lost that football game. So, I just think it's going to be one of those games that, two great teams, two great programs. I just see it going down to the fourth quarter.
I think more than likely J.J. McCarthy is going to have to be a running factor.
I do too.
In this game, because I just don't know that they can line up and run the ball. And I don't know that they have the receivers that are going to scare what is arguably, I think actually these are the two best cornerback duos in the country, these two teams. Between Will Johnson, I won't go through the whole set, but between the two teams have the best cornerback duos. The question I have, though, is I don't know that J.J. McCarthy is much different than he's different, but in terms of effectiveness, than a KJ Jefferson or a Jaden Daniels in regards to what he presents the defense versus Jalen Milroe could be a big shock to Michigan's system. They haven't seen anybody like him.
That's a great point. They haven't. I can tell you that. Going back through Michigan's schedule, looking at the quarterbacks they played against, they have not played against a guy like Jalen Milroe. And you don't understand, as we hear often with these players that are special, but it's true. Until you're down on the field watching him play, you don't understand how big he is, how athletic he is, how fast he is, how strong he is. He looks like a 100-meter sprinter. That's the way he's built, Mark, in that he's very muscular, but he's not bulky. Do you know what I mean? He's still very lean, very streamlined. And, we watched Lamar Jackson put on a clinic last night against the 49ers, and I know Lamar Jackson is a special player, but Jalen Milroe has some of that type of talent, man. When he pulls it down, he's a problem now. And he certainly throws it well enough that you have to respect his ability to throw the ball, particularly down the field. So I'm with you 100%. I don't think Michigan's seen a guy like Jalen Milroe. You can do everything right on defense, and he can still break you down. And as far as McCarthy is concerned, I'm with you. He's going to have to use his legs. I think that he can run, and I do think that Alabama can pressure the quarterback. So with Turner and Braswell coming off the edge, he's going to have to step up in the pocket, and sometimes he's going to have to pull it down and go. So I think both these quarterbacks are effective running the game, running the ball. But Milroe's just, he's a next level athlete, Mark. And J.J. McCarthy is a good athlete, but Jalen Milroe is a special kind of guy. Like I said, when you see him for yourself in person, you just kind of go, wow. He's not as big as KJ Jefferson, but he's faster. He's probably not quite as sleek and smooth as Jaden Daniels, but he's more powerful. He's just got all those capabilities that make him just very dynamic and very difficult to defend.
And not only does he have a gun, like the ball looks pretty spinning in the air 60 yards downfield, but it's almost like he's more accurate the further he has to throw it.
I think so. I think his deep ball, although he has really come a long way in the intermediate patterns and fitting the balls into tight windows. But yeah, the deep ball is a beautiful ball. And, I don't want to jinx the guy, but I just can't remember him missing very many of those. When there's been a guy downfield that's been open, he's hit the guy, and he's oftentimes hit him in stride. And you're right. He throws a very catchable ball. All you need to do is go watch 4th and goal from the 31 in the Iron Bowl. I mean, that ball, when you consider the line of scrimmage was the 31, it was in the back corner of the end zone, which is about another 8 or 9 yards. And he was standing on, nearly the 40. So, that was a close to a 50-yard throw. That wasn't a short throw. And, he just delivered a beautiful catchable ball that it was a phenomenal throw. I mean, it's one of the best throws I've ever seen when you consider the circumstances and what was at stake. And he didn't rush it. He surveyed the field. He saw Bond break to the quarter with just one defensive back on him, and he just delivered it right in his chest, man.
Gary, there's no question that this Alabama defense is loaded with future NFL players. And I mentioned earlier Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry at corner. And Michigan's strength is not at wide receiver. They're nice players. They're good. But I've heard some criticism of the Alabama defense not having the type of vintage, just incredible, off the charts, Will Anderson, Quinnen Williams kind of players along the front. How would you assess Alabama up front?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think they're good up front. I think they've gotten better as the season's gone along. I don't necessarily see special. Tim Keenum on the nose has been really solid. He's terrific against the run. Tim Smith, Jaheim Otis, both big guys that are athletic. And, of course, Justin Aboigbe has probably been their most consistent defensive lineman. Really solid players, good players. But, yeah, I agree with that. There's not a Quinnen Williams up there. There's not a Jaron Reed. There's not a N'Shawn Robinson. There's not a Jonathan Allen. There's not a Deron Payne. They don't have those guys. They got good players, but they're not dominant players up front on defense the way they've been. And now the edge guys, Braswell and Turner, they're fairly, they're pretty special. But your interior defensive line, I'm with you there. I think they're good, but I don't look at them, and I don't think offensive lines look at them and say we can't block them. I think they say, we can block these guys. So, yeah, I think that's a very fair statement. They're good, but I'm not saying that they're dominant, because I don't think they are.
Can we say the same thing about the backfield, where we are accustomed to seeing Derrick Henry and Najee Harris, and we could go on forever, that the talent, the recruiting rankings would tell us otherwise, that they have the potential there, but nobody has really taken charge to be that kind of special runner.
There's no first-team All-Americans. There's no Heisman Trophy candidates, but very solid. Jason McClellan, who missed the SEC championship game, terrific out of the backfield, great in space, good receiver. Roydell Williams is not a tall guy, but he's a powerful downhill runner. Put his foot in the ground, one cut, hit it hard. And the guy that's really come on is the third back, Jam Miller, who's kind of a combination of both of those guys. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, but he's a little bigger and a little more physical than both of them. So, yeah, very solid at running back. But you're right. I mean, there's not right now. There's, now Justice Haynes is a guy they're really, really high on down the road. But between Miller and McClellan, you're talking about guys who have a shot to make it in the NFL, but they're not first-round draft picks or second-round draft picks. They're probably mid-round picks or later-round picks, and guys that are going to just try to probably make a roster, not somebody that the NFL is sitting there and saying, hey, should we, Jahmyr Gibbs last year, first-round pick, and you're seeing why, he's dynamic, but they don't have that out of the backfield. And really the same thing at receiver. This is a really solid Alabama team. Now, secondary-wise, you mentioned the two corners with McKinstry and Arnold. They're both first-rounders, so they're special there. But overall, this is a really good team, a deep team, but it does not have the superstar names the way a lot of these Alabama teams have had in the past. And I think that's been reflected by, the postseason awards. Some guys made, Dallas Turner made first-team All-America, but there's some other guys that, that you thought maybe would be in contention for some of that, and they didn't get it. And overall, the individual awards, even the kicker, Will Reichert, who I thought was the best kicker in the country, didn't win the kicking award, the Groza Award. So it's a really good Alabama team, but it's shorter on superstar type talent than what we've seen in the past. And even last year's team. Last year's team was really probably more talented than this year's team, with Bryce Young and Will Anderson Jr. and Jahmyr Gibbs, and they didn't make it to the playoff.
If you're talking about skill position talent, you could make the argument that the team that played Michigan the last time in the Citrus Bowl.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The only thing that team missed was Tua. And Mac Jones by that point had stepped in, and, he played a great game against Michigan in that bowl game. But you had Judy, and you had all those receivers, and you had Najee Harris, another first-round running back. So, yeah, this is a team that really, I think, is kind of why Saban loves this team so much, is they've epitomized team. It's not been, you don't hand it off to number 2 every time, Derrick Henry, and just say, go win the game for us. So you don't throw a little, 6-yard hitch to Jalen Waddle and watch him run 85. You don't do that with this team. Now, I do think Milroe has superstar talent, but I think that he's still developing. But I think he's the one guy on offense that, again, you can do everything right to defend him, man. You can have everybody covered in the patterns. You can get pressure up front. You can have a guy that gets his hands on him, and he can still, make you miss. And the next thing you know, on 3rd and 12, instead of sacking the guy, he gains 15 yards and it's a first down. So he is the one guy on that offense that's an X factor. And they've got good players on that offense. And Isaiah Bond has been terrific and solid. But, yeah, they don't have the superstars that they've had in the past.
Gary Harris, WVUA there in Tuscaloosa. Gary, we so much appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to break things down for us.
Well, thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure, buddy.
Alabama, Michigan, just days away now at the college football playoff Rose Bowl game. And we got Steve Dace here from Michigan Podcast. Everybody gather up, leave those comments and questions. We would appreciate considering the super chat option as well right here at the Voice of College Football. Steve, how you doing today?
The most wonderful time of the year, Mark. I can't be better. How about you?
It is in many ways, even though the bowl season has taken a hit based on people's attitudes and so forth. And also, I understand it's the opt-outs and not knowing, okay, what teams are we seeing and how credible and valid are these results? Because I, like you, love to match up like-seeded teams and then by extension be able to rate and rank and evaluate these conferences based on those at one point being the most valid and meaningful games played between conferences all season. And now you got to look at each one with a different lens, with a different scope based on who didn't make the game and what's the motivation and the incentive. So how much of a hit has your bowl pleasure taken in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to create a wormhole that will just waste our time going down, but I will be interested to see when, with the advent of the 12-team playoff next year, many of these bowl games exist because your former employer just needs programming this time of year. They own a lot of these bowls and their TV ratings are pretty strong. And so I will be fascinated to see if that continues with the advent of the 12-team playoff here next year. And if it is, then, carry on. And I certainly am not going to, argue against having more college football on my television, especially because when the season ends, it's the longest off season we have. I mean, we're not going to get games that count again for another 7.5 months, So you're not going to get an argument from me. But if the ratings decline and this looks more like a reward or much more like an NIT bid than any form of a reward, and I suspect that may be the case. I mean, the amount, particularly with the group of 5 teams, the amount of players that these group of 5 teams have in the transfer portal, of essentially players looking to escape relegation and move up. One thing, again, that's a rabbit hole and wormhole we can go down in, February when there's nothing else to talk about. But one thing I would actually advocate in that scenario is to expand the playoff to 32 teams and have no bowl games. And the bowl sites that we know now, like the Independence Bowl and the Duke's Mayo Bowl, it's still those games, and they serve as the host sites for some of the early round action of the college football playoff. And those are your postseason games. And every single one of them has meaning and, an opportunity in a survive and advance scenario to play for a national championship.
Wow. We will go into that during the off season because I've got so many questions that you could anticipate, I'm sure. Yeah, let's dive right into Alabama, Michigan. Let's just go to it. I just reviewed an article that was posted by The Athletic that I did not anticipate. I just ran into it here in the last couple hours, did not have a chance to read it word for word, but kind of glanced through the talking points. And this came from 10 coaches of various levels, position coaches, coordinators, head coaches.
The year of the anonymous Big Ten coach continued.
The anonymous Big Ten
year
coaches.
of the anonymous red ass who's butthurt about getting his ass spanked 3 years in a row marches on. Is it? And it's just a matter. It's a rotisserie, a menagerie which reporter was it this time? Okay. I mean, it's just, did they all call this time or just happened to call them? It's been quite the year for the anonymous, got my ass kicked Big Ten coach. But yes, go ahead, please continue.
They were talking about football about 92% of the time. The other, they did slip in a few comments about, possible with signals. We don't know if this is a byproduct of signals or otherwise, but those comments were being, but there is some nuts and bolts football here. So we'll start with quarterback JJ McCarthy, because yes, you could take all of the comments that were made and put them in one of three categories in terms of negative Michigan slant. And it was either tied to they're not as talented as Alabama. They don't have the speed, the freakish athletes to stay with Alabama. Number two, their schedule was backloaded. That contributed to their lesser play in some areas on the field late in the season. Or number three, they didn't have the advantage of the signal stealing late in the season against those opponents. So that's pretty much where you could take all these. But as it pertains to JJ McCarthy, is he going to have to be Michigan's version of Jalen Milroe and a better version of JJ McCarthy? Is he going to have to play out of his mind? I'm not going to say that he's got to show us something that he's never shown us, but maybe something he's rarely shown us for 60 minutes.
So I've watched these two teams a lot, and I've read portions of that Bruce Feldman piece in The Athletic, and I mean, I walked away, and I guess after reading that, I'm not surprised to find out that we were in the Gasparilla Motors Bowl this year. I mean, we are just we're clearly treading water here in a 7-5 program. I just was incredulous reading that. I mean, we're in the midst of one of the most dominant periods, not in Michigan football history, but Big Ten football history. I mean, I saw a graphic yesterday of how talented Ohio State's 21 recruiting class was. Those kids are 0-3 against Michigan with an average margin of defeat of 14.3 points per game. I mean, Michigan invented the Big Ten Conference, literally invented it as a league, created it. And what is it? We've won for the first time in school history, 24 games in a row or something against Big Ten opponents, most of them not even close. Michigan beat two big top 10 teams in the last month. There's only a handful of teams that beat two top 10 teams all year long. We had one near miss against an underwhelming foe, and it was on the road at Maryland in a classic sandwich game, which you all know something about as Buckeye fans. And frankly, it's a game that, in all honesty, maybe looking back on it, JJ McCarthy should not have played. Didn't practice all week long. He was so beat up from a shot that he took in the Penn State game. So I'm just kind of incredulous of reading this, and I'm also enjoying it. I like being the son of a bitch. It doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I'm much more in favor of it. I'm not like a lot of the other Michigan fans who I can't even in pearl clutched at, being the Oakland Raiders of college football this year. I was like, it's about damn time. I love this kind of stuff. And I told you when this all began with the sign stealing stuff, you guys are taking a team that was already on a mission and giving them added extra motivation. And the same thing is happening right here. Now, listen, we're playing Alabama. I mean, this is arguably the most dominant program in the history of the sport. It is certainly, when you in the modern, post platoon system, post World War II era, this is the most dominant program that we have seen. You don't make money in college football by giving Nick Saban 3 to 4 weeks to prep for you. So I'm not unaware of who our opponent is, but me, I watch a lot of college football. I've watched these two teams a lot. I watched an Arkansas team that decided to not fire its coach because it knew the schedule it was going to take next year was so bad that it would just go ahead and take a mulligan for a season so the next coach could come in 25 with a fighting chance, almost beat this Alabama team. I was sitting in this very man cave watching live when Jalen Milroe pulled something out of his ass on 4th and 31 in one of the worst defended final plays since whatever defense Michigan was in it during the Colorado Hail Mary 30 years ago. The idea that, this isn't the Alabama team we played in the Citrus Bowl with a first-round pick at quarterback, and he was the backup, and all 3 receivers were first-round picks in the NFL. They don't have that kind of skill position talent this year. Jalen Milroe is the entire offense for them. There's no Will Anderson level of draft pick this year. Dallas Turner is really good. Both their edges are really good. There's no Jonathan Allen. There's no Quinnen Williams just wrecking the interior gaps of your defense. I mean, I know their corners are really good. I'm not worried about how good your corners are. We're barely going to throw at those guys anyway. I don't care about that. Okay. The way we play, it's not like we're going to be out there chucking the ball outside the hashes 30 times. So, Kool-Aid McKinstry's going to get his calisthenics in. He'll look good out there running around, and Terry and Arnold, they'll look good. They'll look like first-round draft picks, and they'll barely break a sweat, whether we're winning by 20 or losing by 20 the way we play. They're not really going to be factors in the game, So, I mean, we are 13-0 for a reason, man. I mean, all the analytics have had us pretty much number 1 since the middle of October. But I guess we suck, reading that athletic piece, and I've never really, you know what the dumbest chant in sports is? After you beat a really good team and you chant overrated, why would you demean your own accomplishment? And to have your own league hate you so much that they're literally saying, we just sucked as a league. They're not any good. They just beat us because we just sucked as a league. If I'm an Ohio State fan, I sure as hell better not find out Ryan Day is one of those anonymous coaches. All right. I mean, you're out there telling everybody, well, we just weren't good as a league, basically. We sucked. I like that smoke. This Michigan team is different than any other I can remember, maybe since 1997. And we've had a lot of good teams other than, between that year and this one. But those are the 2 teams I can think of, Mark, that liked this kind of smoke, that wanted it, had that serrated edge. Okay. And so I think it's excellent motivation. My biggest concern in this game is just what Michigan's postseason performances have been under Jim Harbaugh, period. They've been dreadful in many cases, and like I said a few minutes ago, typically the path to success is not giving Nick Saban more time to study you, and so that is my concern is that right there. But matchups wise, I think we actually match up as well as you could ask to match up with an Alabama team in the college football playoff. And in many respects, it's like old Alabama Nick Saban with new Alabama Nick Saban. And it's kind of like what you see in March Madness in college basketball. They've got the McDonald's All-Americans. We've got the 4 stars that we kept in school, and developed. We got a lot of grown men. They got a lot of guys that still have some growing up to do. But I think the biggest edge here is the pregame and the pre-bowl prep. I think if you're in Michigan, I saw Adam Rittenberg say, regardless of what the analytics say, I mean, just the performance of these two coaches in the postseason, the chasm is so wide, he can't help but pick Alabama. I think that's as good of analysis as any. What I still find fascinating, Mark, one last thing on this soliloquy, and then I'll stop. What I find fascinating is all of this early sharp money on Alabama in this game, and yet Vegas has remained with Michigan as the favorite. They're really exposed right now. If you look at the money that has been bet, and fans aren't betting on a game 3 weeks in advance. Those are professionals, and I find that basically Vegas has taken a pro-Michigan position on the game when you look at the fact where the number has remained and the amount of money that has been wagered on Alabama.
Well, when I look at the various matchups and I look at the strengths and weaknesses of the teams, I've come to the conclusion that you just mentioned that Adam Rittenberg has come to, and I spit out a prediction on your show last week that may or may not be the final prediction that I make, but that's where I'm at right now, because I do think that everything that you stated about Alabama is correct. However, we have seen those vulnerabilities out of Alabama teams in the past in regards to not necessarily the talent comparison you were making position to position, but the underwhelming performances against the likes of Auburn in Iron Bowls past and other marginal teams that they have slipped up or almost tripped up against. So we've seen that out of Alabama teams that then rose to the occasion in the playoff to win a national championship, challenge for a national championship. But Jalen Milroe would be the one in terms of an X and O factor that I just don't know where Michigan's going to. I'm not doubting that they can contain him but they just haven't seen anything like him.
Well, someone mentioned this to me after you and I talked about this on my show a couple of weeks ago, and I hadn't considered it, and it was right in front of my face. And lo and behold, there's a story out I read yesterday about how essentially Alex Orji is mimicking Jalen Milroe in practice. They're basically the same guy. Now, Orji's not as developed as a passer, but Jalen Milroe is not developed as a passer. He throws a great deep ball. That's about all he throws. You know, I'm actually not concerned about that. I'm not. I mean, our defensive coordinator coached against Lamar Jackson and practiced every day. I think you're going to watch Michigan. I think Michigan their game plan is going to be you sit in the pocket and you throw the ball up the seam accurately and throw deep outs accurately. And if you do that, we'll tip our cap. Good luck in the national championship game. But we're not going to be blitzing and everything else and letting you come out of the pocket. We're going to keep you in there, funnel you in there, and good luck to you. We're going to make you read the defense and fit the ball into windows. And if you execute that with complementary football, the way Michigan plays offense, they're not going to get a lot of short fields. I'm more worried about the Michigan offense than I am the Michigan defense.
I guess, yeah. So where they're going to score, how they're going to score, because of, if this was the Michigan offensive line performance of the last 2 years and not the one that I've seen over the last 6 weeks.
I agree with what you're about to say. Yeah. Because what's the interior of the Alabama defense is the weakness. Yes. Yeah.
And can they take advantage of that weakness?
And that's, and we're acting like we still had a 1,000-yard rusher that had 25 touchdowns. So, I mean, we're acting like this offensive line is, awful. It's just not as good as it's been the last couple of years. But at this juncture now, when it's good on good and elite on elite, you're right. The margins are so slim, man, that, the difference between you have a B offensive line to an A+ offensive line. That's the difference between at this level now winning the national championship or not. Particularly with the way we play offense, I don't disagree. The thing the two things I am the most concerned about are unknowable things. And what's Michigan's bowl prep like? And, JJ said the other day that they're doing completely differently what they did against TCU. That could be good. That could be bad. That could be an overreaction one way, could be a lesson learned. We'll get the answer to that, Mark, about 6 o'clock Eastern, or about 6 o'clock Pacific, I should say, on New Year's Day is when we'll get that answer, The other thing that's unknowable is we did not, even when he was healthy, we did not see JJ run a lot this year. And a lot of us on the Michigan side believe that was really because Michigan just knew they were going to beat a lot of these teams. And why expose that when you don't have a proven Cade McNamara kind of a backup sitting there? Okay, fine. But then we were told that he was ready to go for Ohio State. And I mean, go back and watch that game. The amount of crashing Ohio State did off the edge, off every read look, basically daring at any point. If JJ just kept the thing one time, man, he probably could have ran 40 yards, and never did, never kept it once. I go back even to the last play there on the 3rd and 6 when Michigan was trying to close that game out. And if there was ever a time to have him keep it, that would have been it. They never did. So were they exaggerating about how healthy he was at that point? Or not, and we had questions. Shea Patterson was a very mobile quarterback. We were always very frustrated with why he almost never kept either, so that to me is unknowable. If you were going to tell me that they were going to make JJ a consistent running threat, because if you go back and look at the games where Alabama struggled, particularly with their inside run defense, the games I just mentioned, Auburn, Arkansas, the threat of KJ Jefferson keeping it. Now he's a real runner. Peyton Thorne is not, but he's a willing one. And, what that did to open up, uncertainty in the Alabama defense, that is an absolute must for Michigan to win this game, in my view. And I think it's the kind of game, the first person to 24, I think will win the game.
Yeah, the more I think about it, read about it, listen to you, listen to myself, I'm going to suppress my score most likely as well. Yeah, Michigan producing offense in this game. So we talked about JJ, and that's why I think he has to be a runner in this game, just to open up so many things and just to extend a drive that otherwise won't be extended if he doesn't take that opportunity. You talked about the wide receiver situation and the unlikely scenario in which they become a factor. Colston Loveland's an excellent tight end. He's one of the best in the country as a pass receiver. AJ Barner's a complete tight end. They could create some kind of mismatches with both of those guys on the field. But the offensive line, and despite Blake Corum still producing 24 touchdowns, he's at like 4.7 per case. He's like a yard plus off of his average from last year. They have clearly not been the running team. They're like 70th in yards per carry this year. I don't know if they can operate as a exclusive passing team to tight ends with a plodding running game and create enough offense.
Well, of course they can't. I think that, this reminds me of the conversation before the Ohio State game last year. Well, they haven't thrown the ball all year long, so that must mean they can't. So I guess we'll just put 75 guys in the box. Oh, look, they can throw the ball when you leave them man-to-man. I think that you're looking at a game plan. If they're willing to let JJ run, that is what opens up the rest of the running game, is the fear of that. And if you go back in the Ohio State game in 2022, much of Michigan's rushing damage occurred in the fourth quarter. Michigan rushed for nothing in the first half of that game. Started getting a little bit of movement in the third quarter, but it was really, that's when JJ running the football, including the run he had there on that touchdown, that was the go-ahead touchdown at that point. And now all of a sudden, Latham Ransom is sitting there on the edge, and a couple of times he's just a little hesitant. Is JJ going to keep that ball or not? And that crease was all Donovan Edwards needed, was to close out that game. So that's going to need to happen here. I mean, JJ, we are not going to run the football consistently unless they believe JJ McCarthy is a running threat. And I think that's where the big plays in the passing game can come from. But I absolutely believe with JJ as a running threat and essentially some form of a modified RPO look where we're consistently attacking the middle of the field, I absolutely believe that Michigan can win the football game if they're able to effectively do that. And more importantly, if they're willing to effectively do that.
So when I make predictions, whether those are season-long predictions or big game predictions like this, I would love to be ahead of the curve. I would love to be able to see something before people are comfortable saying, yes, that's the direction college football is headed. To be able to see that Texas, which I guess to a certain extent I did see them breaking out this year. But with Michigan versus an SEC opponent at this level, I have not seen Michigan be able to compete. Again, what they've done inside the Big Ten, I cannot discount, as they are the gold standard in this conference. You cannot win it 3 consecutive times. No Ohio State fan in their right mind can claim that Ohio State's still the best program in the conference, even though they're recruiting better and all that other stuff, and the record's about the same. They've gotten beaten on the field, and they've got 3 straight titles. But their only connection to extending that dominance is because they've beaten Ohio State, and Ohio State is the only team in the conference basically that's gone out the last 20 years and been able to look capable against the elite competition, whether that's Clemson or the SEC. And I just haven't seen it in so long out of Michigan that there's something that tells me that, am I going to flip on this game on New Year's Day and see maybe a modified version of a pitch to Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards where Jacoby Dean or one of those guys just, from 2 years ago can race from the other hash and just like a BB gun him down. And I'm just going to be like, okay, this is a different level. When they're focused, when they're incentivized, boom, this is going to be Alabama just to the hilt.
I don't think this Alabama team is anything close to the Georgia team you just referenced. Anything close to that. That being said, you could be correct. That could happen. And it won't deter one iota my love for this season or this team. To me, everything at this point is gravy. I don't, and I just speak for myself. I don't ever claim to speak for Michigan fans or anybody else. You can be any kind of fan you want to be, as far as I'm concerned. But for me, I'm 50. This isn't my first rodeo. I've seen plenty of Michigan teams fall on their face in this position in January. Won't change what I think at all. The primary goals of our program have always been to beat Ohio State and win the Big Ten championship. Anything that happens after that is gravy. But you're 5 minutes away from Beano Cook telling us just to not even show up and bring the band. I guess we'll go out there and play, Mark, and I guess we'll just, roll around in the grass for a while, and I guess we'll just kind of hope to be that plucky bunch that gets lucky with our 20 NFL draft picks and just kind of hope that it turns out okay,
Well,
may fortune smile upon us.
I gave you a 4-point prediction of a 4-point game on your show. So in no way am I discounting Michigan. I'm just saying that it's been an SEC dominated sport, and there's only been one school in this conference that.
Here's why. We're just, as a program, now that's going to change here soon. In the next 2 to 4 years, this is going to be a fairly level playing field. These guys are all going to be given revenue sharing and everything else.
So.
Okay, that's going to happen. We haven't. The universities are in an untenable situation right now, where, look at the last court ruling on the transfer case. You had the court say to the NCAA, "So these guys aren't employees, right?" The NCAA said, "Yeah." The courts came back and said, "Why are you trying to enforce a non-compete on people who aren't working for you? You can't. You wouldn't do that on any other student. There's they're still students, right? So they're not employees. No, they're students, right? Then why are you enforcing non-competes on students who aren't employees? You wouldn't do that anywhere else. You can't." And so what's happening, and the amount of guys in the transfer portal and everything right now, we're looking at a situation where Ohio State could very well end up with whoever's on the team right now as the quarterback next year. Your starter moves on, and you just can't get in. You can't win a bidding war for Cam Ward. I don't believe DJ Uiagalelei is an upgrade over Kyle McCord myself. I don't think the Kansas State quarterback is an upgrade over Kyle McCord myself, and he's going to USC anyway, apparently. And so this is an untenable situation now, where now we've gone from the schools have all the leverage and protection to they have none. And the players now have more freedom to remonetize themselves than professionals do. There's no way that's going to be a long-term deal. They're going to just end up formalizing a relationship. But until that moment, we are just never going to be a program that deals in the, let's give 18-year-olds a bunch of money. Let's pay kids to even visit the school. I wish we would, but that's just not Michigan's MO. It's not its ecosystem, not what it's ever going to be about. And so as long as Michigan chooses to self-limit like that, and if it did play that game, I mean, we have levels of boosters that make what universities like Alabama have, look like romper room. The alumni, the wealth of the alumni that we have in our universities up here are way wealthier than the teams down south. It's just we don't mobilize our boosters like that. Michigan's not going to do that. And so until it does, I just don't think it's realistic that we're going to be beating teams like Alabama for national championships. I will say that this year, I think, is a unique scenario where Alabama is not as dominant as it has been. Michigan has a potential first-round draft pick either this year or next at quarterback, and a lot of guys that are in their 4th, 5th, or 6th year of playing college football. And you can, you see it in the NCAA tournament where you can bridge that gap with a Kentucky or North Carolina and Duke that out recruits you every year because you're Gonzaga and you're older, if you know what I'm trying to say. Your guys have been in the program longer. This is a unique scenario where I think it could happen. And so that's why I'm more optimistic than I have been in the past. But that being said, I don't think it's like some kind of guarantee that we're going to go in there and win or anything of that nature. I still think, if based on history, I don't blame anybody for picking Alabama.
And so despite this being a unique scenario, as you just laid it out, you're not desperate to win this game and you just still consider this gravy, even though this could be a once in a decade opportunity.
Yeah. I can't, if I allow myself to get into a situation where we went 13-1 and beat Ohio State and then won the Big Ten, and I'm disappointed, I need to reconsider my life choices. I think, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to be like, walking out of the Rose Bowl with my son here in a couple of weeks, like, slapping five and cracking knuckles, but that was a great L. But dude, we went 13-1 and won 3 straight Big Ten championships. And I mean, it's not my life, man. If I get to the point where that's disappointing to me, then I think it's probably time for me to dial it back a bit.
Well, good for you. We not that I'm surprised by that answer. We certainly spend a lot of our time on here talking people off the edge and off the cliff and letting them know, hey, let's not tie our identity to a football brand. Like Jerry Seinfeld once said, laundry, especially in this day and age, laundry.
Right. No, don't give me too much credit. If we would have lost to Ohio State, I would have been there. Okay. All right. But we climbed the mountain. That's the mountain, and maybe it's generational. I grew up in an era. I grew up in the Schembechler era as a child, and that was the the parameters of our program. And my feelings on this could change if we had a more level player acquisition field, if you know what I'm trying to say. Okay, if we're sitting here, if we're fortunate enough to still be sitting here and 3 to 5 years from now, and now we've got standardized revenue sharing with players and stuff across the board, then my opinion might be a little bit different right now. But we don't. And I'm not here to. I don't care that these as I said before, if you're as long as we're not harboring criminals, people that are menaces to society or campus, then at that point, I'll even get rid of the academic requirement, because most of what these schools teach is a bunch of, pagan, un-American gobbledygook anyway. So I don't care what your degree is.
That's a great point.
I don't care. I used to have those used to be my 2 rules. Don't abandon the academic mission of your university, and don't harbor criminals. Well, now I'm at the point that I want you to abandon the academic mission of most university. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so now I just have one. So now I agree with Cardale Jones. No one brought him there to play school. I agree with him. The one thing I still say is, no menaces to society, man. Other than that, you're playing a sport where at any minute your spine could crack. So no, I don't care if Alabama has a booster that takes care of a player and his mama. I don't think this, and in no other context of human history would that be considered like some immoral act. People who have a lot taking care of people who have a little in exchange for a service rendered. That's actually called commerce in like every other era of human history that I'm aware of. Okay. Except for college sports, it's the only time and place in all of human history that's not considered a benevolent action. So no, I don't care. I'm not crying. I'm not whining. I wish Michigan did more of these things, because we have a lot more revenue than the boosters at Alabama do, but we don't. And so as long as we choose to self-limit doing those things, there's always going to be a roster advantage against us in some of these situations. And I recognize that. And I have to therefore adjust my expectations accordingly. But I do think, given the makeup of our team this year, given the makeup of their team this year, there isn't a first-round draft pick next year, top 10 wide receiver. There isn't. They don't have a Henry Ruggs, let alone a Jalen Waddle. They don't. Okay. There's no Derrick Henry there. No Najee Harris there. We played all those guys in a Citrus Bowl a few years ago, by the way. They don't have those guys this year. Now, maybe Isaiah Bond will be that guy a year from now. He's not that guy right now, And so, given the experience on our team, I do think there's an opportunity to bridge some of that talent gap at the the nth level that in many other years we probably couldn't manage to accomplish, like when we played Georgia a couple of years ago.
Because I believe the lowest rated talent team that ever won the national championship was Sean Watson's team at number 9. This Michigan team's at 14, I believe, something like that. But what's not being accounted for, and it's difficult to quantify anymore is, of course, the influx of the transfer portal. And of course,
Correct.
Michigan's been instrumental in plugging holes through the transfer portal.
Yep. And I think Michigan has discovered twofold. One, they have learned how to keep guys in school longer. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to make it look like we're pious over here and everybody's an amateur. That's not true. Okay. I mean, I've pointed out to you before, we have over 100 players on our team that have been on scholarship at some point, and you're only allowed 85. So there's a lot of guys, that have been in this program that are getting taken care of. Michigan has just chosen to not get into the seedy underbelly of high school recruiting with agents and stuff at that level. I mean, you could have called me up the night Walter Nolan got in the portal and there was a Michigan graphic, and I could have told you never happening in a million years. And his family is just putting Michigan on there because it's good to blow up his leverage, his value in a market. Michigan's never playing in a market like that. But also Jimmy, because of his NFL background, does not want to give a bunch of kids who haven't played here yet a bunch of money. He thinks that's toxic for the locker room, and so Michigan instead will take care of Blake Corum, make sure he's got a 6-7 figure check, and you'll make more money here for one more year than you would be being a 5th round pick in the NFL. That's where, and that's how we've had Trevor Keegan stay in school, and a lot of these guys is because that's where we have spent our money, is on guys that are proven, or bringing guys in who have already proven themselves somewhere else via the transfer portal.
Do you have any interest in this other game, Texas-Washington?
I think it's going to be a tremendous game. What I think is fascinating about it, Mark, is the strength of the Texas defense. This is the 1 year that we've had a Big 12 team in the playoff where they up front look like a national championship team is supposed to look. Okay. Here's the problem, though. I don't know how much that matters against Washington, the way they play offense. I mean, if Michael Penix is healthy, they get rid of that ball so quick. There are so many mismatches with those three receivers. I mean, I was back in Ann Arbor for the Purdue game this year, and went to dinner with a couple of Michigan boosters, and they were asking me, who's the one team I was afraid of? And I said, at the time, I said Washington, because they're the one team I thought that could force us to get out of the tempo of game we want to play. You know what I'm trying to say? That they hit like two mismatches in the first quarter, be up 14-0, and all of a sudden we're like, oh bleep, we're not going to get away with kind of playing our Anaconda game. They're going to speed us up. And I didn't think any other team could do that to us unless we turned it over and made mistakes. Not have us do that to ourselves, but they do that to us. Okay. And I do think it'll be an adjustment with all three of those. People forget, one of those, Odunze's been healthy all year. The other two guys, Polk and is it McMillan? They've been in and out of the lineup, especially McMillan, much of this since pretty much that Oregon game. And you saw in the Oregon rematch with all three of them there, it's just really hard to keep him in that pocket long enough to put pressure on him without one of those guys getting open. And so that's what I think will be fascinating, is with the Texas defenses, with its strength and its front seven. I don't know how relevant that's going to be against a team that's going to spread you out, and with those frisbee catching dogs and just throw the ball all over the yard. On the other hand, I think the Texas offensive line will just destroy Washington's defensive front.
Yep.
So I think the contrast in styles there, I think, is going to be really, really fascinating. Sarkisian going up against his old program, of course. Kalen DeBoer is 10-0 against ranked teams as a head coach, man. All right. And he's only been a head coach for a little bit too, so indoor on a fast track. I think that's a very fascinating matchup and a complete flip of the coin.
Now, to me, it's a little bit more simplistic than that, in that I see everything that you do out of this Washington offense exposing not necessarily a weakness, but almost any secondary can be exposed just because of the nature of the game and the rules that favor the offense and the receivers. But where Texas can pretty much match, I believe, with receivers and quarterback play, what Washington does, maybe a smidge less, but they're just so much better and have so much more fortitude up front on both sides of the ball that I just think Texas is a superior football team at the line of scrimmage, and that will matter to some degree. Of course, it's a collision sport and still is, and one at the line of scrimmage that Texas, I think, is a clear better team.
I don't think the Big 12 was very good. I think Washington is a more talented version of Oklahoma. And I think indoor on a fast track, Washington could absolutely recreate what was the scenario, what was the game script that Oklahoma built in order to deliver Texas's only L. I don't think Washington is interested in getting into hand-to-hand combat with Texas. It's not how they play anyway. You know, they're going to just try to go around them. They're going to try to blitzkrieg them, not Maginot Line them. And I think if Quinn Ewers is on, then and if you're telling me that Xavier Worthy's high ankle sprain is okay, you know, but Quinn Ewers was really good in the Big 12 championship game, but he'd really not been that great since the Alabama win. That's how you're the quarterback at Texas and a top 5 team, and you're not even a Heisman candidate. You're not even getting mentioned, you know? So we'll see. Here's the one thing I know for sure. Washington's not going to run for a lick on them. And I don't think Texas can cover those 3 receivers because I don't think anybody can if they have time. So I think that'll be a fascinating matchup. I think if you're Texas, you want to slow the game down and make it and put it in more of a mosh pit. And you do not want this to be a battle of who can get in the most plays, because that's where I think Washington is a more talented version of Oklahoma and they can recreate that game script.
What causes me a little hesitancy on my outlook on this game is that Washington did show up to be a more stout rush defense and offensive line play against Oregon in the rematch because they were healthier. Mm-hmm. They're healthier all over the place. Their secondaries, you've got guys back there. Of course, you mentioned the receivers. Some of their key defensive linemen showed up in that Oregon game that had been missing. So they're a much healthier football team and proved to be a little sturdier than I give them credit for.
I just think with the rules of the game, as you referenced earlier, those 3 receivers, and we're not talking ragamuffins here either. These are pro receivers. It's hard to guard all of those guys. It's hard for not one of them to be open at all times, you know? And I wonder if Texas might say, you know, let's see if Washington has the patience to matriculate the ball down the field here a little bit. Let's see if Michael Penix will, because we've seen this in Indiana, we've seen it in Washington. He can get greedy if you force him to keep throwing the ball underneath and make mistakes, right? Okay, and so how patient is Michael Penix willing to be? I think if I were Texas, that's what I would want to know. I would want to see how content are they to have to hold the ball and move it down the field steadily, as opposed to giving them an opportunity just to throw the ball up and those receivers just moss me all evening long.
Steve, we appreciate you being here. Have a great trip out to the Rose Bowl and enjoy it with the family, regardless of the result. Merry Christmas to you. Appreciate you being here. I'm not going to ask you whether you're rooting for the Big Ten, because I think I know better that you really don't care. You have no conference pride or investment in the Big Ten bowl record.
Y'all ripped that out of me this year. No, it does me no good. I hope you guys do well. You know, I don't care about stuff like that.
I'm not even talking about Ohio State specifically, just the entire league.
I used to be a conference pride guy. This past year, y'all did your best to rip it out of me. You did. And if I hear Matt Rule bitch and moan one more time that he lost, 52-7 or whatever it was because we scouted him, I first of all, I'm gonna have to pop like 7 Cialises to ever get an erection again because of the testosterone that he is just dumping his T level into the sea. I mean, it's so wimpy and emasculating. It's embarrassing. But, now that we have scoreboard on everybody, I'm over it now. But I appreciate it, Mark. You guys all have a Merry Christmas too. We're this plucky underdog. We'll do our best to go out there and not embarrass the league, and we'll give it our all, and we'll see what happens.
You can't play that card. You're not the Vegas underdog. You are the favorite. You are the favorite. All right, Steve. Great to see you as always. I appreciate you making the time.
You bet, man. May the odds be ever in our favor, Mark. Thank you.
The one and only Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. It's MichiganPodcast.com. It's also Michigan Podcast, of course, on Twitter and right here on YouTube. And he even allows me to show up most weeks to talk some college football. So we always have a good time doing that. We are going to be back at 4:30 Eastern. 4:30 Eastern. We've got a Kentucky update. We've got an Ohio State update. We know that the Buckeyes had an outstanding recruiting class. However, they did lose some 5-star flips. One just came today, maybe a high 4-star in the case of Jeremiah McClellan. So we'll find out what happened there and get the complete recap on the Kentucky recruiting class. If the real MVP's out there, I don't know if I have any other Kentucky fans that join us here at the Voice of College Football on a regular basis. Although I got to say, we post those Kentucky videos over on the SEC channel, and they do quite well. Like 5,000 people showing up for a Kentucky video. So that is good to see. We do have a super chat coming in. Appreciate that coming in from Matthew Miller. Yes, Matthew. So before we read Matthew's comment, I want to remind everyone to join Matthew right here. Right there. Texas, Washington, college football playoff. And oh yeah, Texas with the top 5 recruiting class that was signed on this very day, National Signing Day. So Matthew will have the complete rundown of the National Signing Day gains by Texas, and also, of course, more talk about Washington and the college football playoff. But Matthew is letting us know here, Texas also turned the ball over 4 times, and Dylan Gabriel rushed for 113 yards. Neither of those things will happen in that game. Join Matthew tonight. Well, I am certainly more sure that Michael Penix is not running for 113 yards. Whether Texas is going to turn it over 4 times, probably not, and probably not especially against that defense, because it's a defense that's better than it's been most of the season, because they have gotten healthy prior to the Pac-12 championship game and showed themselves to be a little bit stronger and a little bit more assignment disciplined than they had shown for weeks. I pretty much know who I'm going to pick in these 2 playoff games, I believe. But we shall see. We will make our official predictions here later in the month. Again, 4:30 Eastern, Kentucky, Ohio State. We've got a Florida State show tonight. We've got also Miami. Florida State at 6, Miami at 7. But make it back here at 4:30 Eastern. We'll have some more National Signing Day updates for you. Bama, Michigan, power matchup, intriguing matchup. Everything's on the line, college football playoff. Let's get to it right here at the Voice of College Football. And if you enjoy the content, please like the video and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. When Bama's on offense, it looks like this. 54th ranked offense in college football, averaging 401 yards per game. Yards per play, Bama better at number 30 in the nation, 6.36. Some of the better defenses Bama has faced. Look at Texas A&M, number 9 in the country in total defense, number 25 in yards per play given up. Georgia, top 10 defense, also number 13 in yards per play given up. Texas, top 25 defense in both categories. Tennessee in that top 30 to 40 range as well. Now, how did the Tide fare against these upper echelon defenses on their schedule? Well, we know that the week 2 appearance against Texas was not a great one for Jalen Milroe, and we know that his story, his ascension, his improvement, and Bama finding an identity around him to build this offense has been the storyline for Alabama football, coming back from an awful offensive first month. But that was most notably seen against Texas when Milroe made some bad choices, bad decisions, didn't see some coverages, and threw some bad interceptions against Texas in that 34-24 home defeat. Against Tennessee, Bama was down by 2 scores at home early, and this was at the point in which Jalen Milroe really started to catch his stride. The defense did contribute to the 27-0 comeback, but it was Jalen Milroe hitting that deep ball against Tennessee that proved to be the difference against the Vols. Another key step in Jalen Milroe's progress came at Texas A&M against one of the more talented defensive fronts in college football, where he had to use his legs but keep his eyes downfield to make throws downfield, also elude the Texas A&M pass rush in a 26-20 Bama win. Ole Miss fields a top 50 defense in college football. They really held down the Bama offense, and again, this was right when Bama was just starting to figure things out on that side of the football. And this was coming off some of those deplorable offensive showings that Bama really turned its season around, trailed Ole Miss early, and then marched on to the 24-10 win. So that was mostly the Bama defense getting it done, but Jalen Milroe certainly made big throws and big runs against an Ole Miss defense, number 59 in the country overall, number 48 in yards per play. Ironically, when Bama's offense was down, it was just seriously down because they played one of the worst defenses in the country in South Florida, number 131, number 118 in yards per play, and they couldn't do a darn thing until the fourth quarter. Of course, Jalen Milroe sat on the sideline, and that really turned the season around. There were monsoon-like conditions at times during that game in Tampa, but South Florida and Bama were tied at 3 for the longest time before Bama scored a couple touchdowns late to win the game 17-3. Again, one of the worst defenses in the country statistically. And then, of course, in the big matchup against LSU, the game that decided the SEC Western Division, into the third quarter, it looked like it was going to be one of those games that just went score for score, and the team with the ball last was going to win in a showdown between Jalen Milroe and Jaden Daniels. But Bama's defense stood tall starting in the third quarter, nicked up Jaden Daniels, and Bama rode home to the victory 42-28 in that one. Bama going up against a Michigan defense that ranks number 2 in all of college football in total defense, yards per game, number 4 in yards per play. How did Michigan fare against the better offenses on its schedule? And how about all those lousy offenses on Michigan's schedule? Against Ohio State, the Wolverines won 30-24. They had a crucial pick 6 early in that game by Mike Sanders that got them on the board 7-0. They also, of course, made the key interception by Rod Moore to seal the victory with the Buckeyes driving in the last few seconds of the game against an Ohio State offense that ranked number 37 in college football. 18th, though. The Buckeyes were number 18 in yards per play, so not a prolific Ohio State offense, of course, with Kyle McCord taking the reins from C.J. Stroud, but still a very capable Ohio State offense with plenty of weapons. Statistically, the second best offense Michigan faced was UNLV at number 47 in the country, number 44 in yards per play. UNLV had a fine season, faltered late, but at the time that they played Michigan in September, the Run-In Rebels were doing just that, running up big point totals and yardage early in the season, but of course could not do anything against Michigan. One of the Wolverines' toughest tests proved to be the second to last game of the season against Maryland, a Terps defense that proved to be up to the challenge in a one-score loss. Maryland, number 59 in the nation in total offense, number 51 in yards per play. Talia Tagovailoa at times carved up the Michigan defense, at other times was unable to get the job done. And, of course, it was Michigan's ability to rush Tagovailoa and create turnovers that proved to be the undoing of the Terps in that upset bid. Now look at all these deplorable offenses Michigan faced this season. Iowa dead last in yards per play and yards per game. East Carolina, number 132 per game and number 130 in yards per play. Michigan State, and of course the Wolverines shut them out. And let's credit Michigan here because Michigan State played competitive football against a number of decent teams, like in Iowa, for example, on its schedule, and certainly produced more offense against just about everybody else on its schedule, but against Michigan could do absolutely nothing. Shut out. But the Spartans are awful. Number 125 in total offense, number 128 in yards per play. Minnesota, bottom 10 in the nation, yards per play and in yards at number 120 and 125. Rutgers there as well. This just continues the pattern here. And the Scarlet Knights only scored the 7 points against Michigan in a 31-7 loss. Indiana put up a quick touchdown against Michigan, had another drive that went inside the 15-yard line, and if not for an errant pass, probably would have been up 14-0 on Michigan. And that Indiana offense, number 114 in yards per game, number 101 yards per play. Nebraska, also one of the worst in the nation. And that Husker offense did nothing against the Wolverines. They had one drive in the first quarter, down 14-0 at that point. Drove it inside the Michigan 15 on a nice little 65-yard drive. And then they got stuffed on fourth down, and Nebraska could do nothing after that of consequence. And the Huskers, number 104 in total offense, number 117 in yards per play. So added up here, Michigan played 7 of the very worst offenses in college football. We're talking 7 of the 15 worst, statistically at least, that Michigan's defense got to feast on. Now let's break it down even further, looking at Bama's rushing attack, passing attack against the Michigan defense, both against the pass and against the run. So the Alabama rushing offense, 49th in the country in yards per game. This surprises me, especially with as good as Milroe is running the football. And of course, sacks are included. But still, as devastating as Milroe is as a dynamic playmaker with his legs, Bama, number 70 in the nation in average yards per carry. Consider that although Bama's running back room is, of course, loaded with 4 and 5 stars, and these guys are supposed to break out, a guy like Jace McClellan had a nice season. Nobody has really emerged out of Bama's backfield to be a true star like we've seen in the past. Derrick Henry, TJ Yeldon, Trent Richardson, those guys, or even most recently, Najee Harris or Jahmyr Gibbs. Texas, the number 5 rushing defense in college football, limited Bama to 3.1 yards per carry. Jace McClellan, you see, 12 carries for 45 yards, and Jalen Milroe did some damage on the ground with 44 yards rushing. Tennessee's got the number 14 rush defense in all of college football. Texas A&M's at 16, Kentucky at number 19. Let's see how Bama fared against another 3 of the top 20 rush defenses in the country. Jace McClellan had a nice day against the Vols, 27 carries for $115. That's 4.3 yards per carry. And even more crucial to that Alabama win was that they were able to salt the game away with just a 1-score lead late in the game. They basically held onto the ball for the final 6 or 7 minutes and ran it down Tennessee's throats, and Jalen Milroe had a big 15-yard run to help close out that game. Now forget it when it comes to Bama rushing against Texas A&M. Less than a yard per carry. Again, sacks are involved. Of course, you see Jalen Milroe with negative 31 yards. That's sack yardage because he did have a run of 12 yards. Jace McClellan, 3.3 yards per carry. Bama, all sorts of issues trying to run the ball against Texas A&M. Bama did not completely just shred the Kentucky rush defense, but they were solid and consistent in this game. You see Jace McClellan at 4.8 yards per carry. Jalen Milroe, despite, of course, sack yardage, ran for 3 touchdowns. He had a 16-yard run in that game. Justice Haynes, the prized freshman, had 33 yards at 5.5 yards per carry. And Bama, again, got the big lead. They could run the football. Kentucky knew they were going to run the ball, so that suppressed the rushing average as well at 4.1 yards per carry in Bama's 28-point win. As you might expect, Michigan's rush defense, one of the best in the country. Number 6 in yards given up per game. Number 6 in average yards per carry. And as you might guess, Michigan did not face top rushing offenses. Penn State statistically was the best rushing offense Michigan faced, and we're looking at average yards per carry. Penn State at number 41, Nebraska 56, Purdue 64, and Ohio State only number 72 in the nation in yards per carry. Although Michigan did face a much better version of Ohio State's rushing attack with Travion Henderson catching fire late in the season for Ohio State. So let's check out that game first and foremost. The Buckeyes basically couldn't run it against Michigan, except for they had one determined drive in the third quarter where they ran it down Michigan's throats, but didn't gash them. Did not gash them at all. They were running 4, 6, 3, 5, just consistently running it down the field. But there you see it. Chip Tranum with a 12-yard run. Otherwise, Michigan did not give up a play of over 8 yards in the running game. Xavier Johnson, 9 yards. Okay, 3.8 yards per carry for the Ohio State rush attack. And let's go back to this Penn State rushing attack again. Statistically, this is the best rushing attack that Michigan faced the entire season. And the Ohio State and Penn State games against Michigan are the most valid statistically because the games were competitive for the entire game, especially the Ohio State game down to the last play of the game. For Penn State, still a competitive game deep into the fourth quarter. So for Penn State, they actually ran the ball fairly well against Michigan in this game. Katron Allen, 12 carries, 72 yards. Nice rushing effort there. Drew Aller was able to actually break contain and do some damage. Had a touchdown run of like 10 or 11 yards against Michigan. Nick Singleton, a little bit less effective at 3.3 yards per carry, but added all together, 4.7 yards per carry is a excellent number against this Michigan rush defense. Alabama's pass efficiency, not total yards per game. I don't think that that's relevant. That's dependent on how much you throw the football. But pass efficiency, how effective are you throwing the football? Well, Bama's number 6 in the country. And we know that they got off to a pretty lousy start against the likes of Texas and South Florida. The rating is 167.3 for Jalen Milroe, and he accounts for 90-some% of these stats. 23 touchdowns, 6 picks for the Bama passing attack against pass defenses that ranked number 9, Georgia, Texas 33, Ole Miss 48. Those are the 3 in the top 50 that Bama faced from a pass efficiency defense standpoint. The really bad ones in the SEC were LSU number 94, Mississippi State at number 107. Let's look again at bad early Jalen Milroe against Texas, 14 of 27 for 255. That's not awful, but it was the 2 interceptions that were huge in this game and were just, if you saw the plays, you could just see where he did not read the coverage, did not see and recognize the coverage, and just was baited and deceived into a bad throw. 2 touchdowns, 2 picks for Jalen Milroe against Texas. And, of course, the most recent and the most important game for Alabama was winning the SEC championship game against the 2-time champions, Georgia, and Jalen Milroe didn't have to throw it a ton in this game, 13 of 23. He's not going to be a high percentage guy. For $192, no picks, 2 touchdowns. So he did his job in this game as Bama won 27-24. Look at this Michigan pass defense. The opponent passer rating is only just a tick over 100. Number 6 in the nation. Have given up just 7 touchdown passes against 16 interceptions. Okay, the Ohio State pass offense was the best that Michigan faced at number 14 in the country. Again, that's pass efficiency. Maryland, number 49, Penn State, number 58. So Michigan faced only 3 in the top 60. And look at all these bad, awful passing offenses that Michigan faced, which, of course, plays into the Michigan ranking. It all works together. Good Lord. In order of ineptitude, East Carolina, 133. Iowa, not last. Number 132. How about that? Nebraska 130, Rutgers 127, Minnesota 120, Michigan State 112, Purdue 103. Let's get back to the Ohio State and Penn State games, also the Maryland game, to see how the Michigan pass defense fared against actual teams that could throw the ball downfield and throw it to a teammate that would catch the football. The Wolverines gave up 271 yards passing to the Buckeyes and Kyle McCord and got hit with plays downfield of 44 yards, 32, and 28. They did come up with the two big plays of the game. The first quarter interception that led to the touchdown that we talked about, and also the final play interception that preserved the win. They did give up 271 yards passing at 9.3 yards per attempt. 18 of 30 is 60%. So Ohio State fairly effective in the passing game. Michigan made the two big plays, so they did prove to be somewhat susceptible against a decent or strong passing offense. A lot of playmakers, questionable quarterback play where some throws were missed and some throws and receivers open were missed as well. 1 week earlier against maybe the best throwing quarterback in the Big Ten, Taulia Tagovailoa, a little bit more of the same, actually. As Michigan gave up 247 yards passing, gave up the 24 points. Taulia hit 21 of 31, but also threw the two picks that were critical as Michigan hung on for a 7-point win. Maryland was able to hit throws downfield of 34 and 24 yards in particular as Michigan again won the game by a touchdown. And then if you saw the Penn State game, was it the Michigan pass defense and pass rush, or was it Drew Aller? I'm going to say it was mostly Aller, although Michigan's defense played extremely well in this game. But Aller just freaking missed throws all over the place. 10 of 22, 70 yards. Just a bad effort on his part. Missed key third and fourth down throws. And so Michigan holds Penn State to 70 yards passing on 22 throws. Penn State's receivers did not challenge Michigan downfield as they completed a 19-yarder and a 13-yarder against the Michigan defense. Now let's go Michigan offense, Alabama defense, as the Wolverines relied more heavily on the pass early in the season than they have in recent years, as J.J. McCarthy put up some big passing numbers for a Michigan offense that was so run-dependent with Cade McNamara in previous seasons, and then also with J.J. at the controls in 2022. And the rushing attack not as prominent for Michigan. We will look at it against that Alabama defense that improved as the season wore on. Michigan on the offensive side of the ball was just 68th in yards per game at 380.5, but in yards per play much better. Didn't run a whole lot of plays. Were not in a hurry. Usually had a big lead. Number 43 in yards per play at 6.12. The best defense Michigan played, Penn State, statistically, number 1 in all of college football, and number 1 in yards per play. Ohio State at number 3, Iowa at number 5, and Iowa at number 2 in yards per play. So the Michigan offense faced 3 of the top 5 defenses in the country statistically, and Nebraska wasn't too bad itself. The Huskers, number 13 in yards per game given up, number 9 in yards per play. Rutgers in the top 20. Bowling Green pretty stout at number 30 in total defense, number 43 in yards per play. And even Maryland, look at the yards per play total at number 20 in all of college football. The worst defenses the Michigan offense faced, UNLV at number 102 despite the 9-4 record. Minnesota at number 98. Those were the only two lower than number 80 in total defense. All right, let's go a little bit deeper against these top 3 defenses, Ohio State, Penn State, and the most recent game, the Big Ten championship game against Iowa. Of course, Michigan won 26-0. They had no threat of Iowa scoring in this game or scoring in a substantial way to threaten the Michigan offense. So let's take these numbers into consideration that Michigan was comfortable in its offensive approach, but still, man, the Iowa defense laid it on Michigan's offense. Only 213 total yards by Michigan. J.J. McCarthy, though, pretty efficient, 22 of 30. Short throws, 147 through the air. They only hit on 4 plays downfield of 14, 14, 10, and a 13-yarder. So nothing over 15 yards. And the Michigan rushing attack was stymied by the Hawkeyes here. Blake Corum, 16 carries for 52 yards at 3.3 per carry. Donovan Edwards did have a 17-yard run, but overall Michigan at less than 2 yards per carry, sacks included, against the Iowa defense. Michigan more effective against Ohio State in a different kind of game. 338 yards of total offense is still not prolific. JJ was oh so efficient, though, in this one. He was laser sharp, 16 of 20. Again, not huge plays downfield, but man, these throws that JJ made against Ohio State were killer and decisive in this game. One touchdown pass that was, of course, a work of art, as the Michigan rush game also chipped in the fourth quarter, really stymied for 3 quarters, kicked it in the fourth quarter with a couple long runs. Alex Orji had a 20-yarder as he filled in for JJ on one series, and Blake Corum, of course, the 22-yard touchdown that proved to be decisive. McCarthy got outside of contain for 15 yards as well. And then in the passing attack, we see 34 yards downfield to Colston Loveland and a 22-yarder to Roman Wilson, 19 yards to Cornelius Johnson, and a 16-yarder to A.J. Barner. And now it's the infamous Penn State game. Infamous in that Michigan just basically said, you can't score on us, and your defense is pretty darn good, and they're coming after our quarterback, and we're having trouble in pass pro, so we're just not going to pass it. J.J. McCarthy did go 7 of 8 for 60 yards, and then Michigan shut it down with 32 consecutive runs to close out a 9-point win. And so they ran the ball effectively overall with 227 yards at almost 5 yards per pop, but again, they started to spring the long runs in the fourth quarter once they wore down the Penn State defense. But early on, it was a rough go for Michigan trying to gain yardage in any such way against Penn State. Blake Corum, again, 5.6 yards per carry, had the big 44-yarder. Donovan Edwards broke free for 22 yards at 5.2 per carry on 10 rushes. And J.J. McCarthy effective against the Penn State defense in keeping them honest, as Michigan went for 287 in total yardage in this game against Penn State, the number 1 defense in all of college football. The stats aren't going to be quite as extreme, but this Bama defense is lights out. It's so good. It's always been good and continues to be good, and I believe that we are going to be blessed by seeing the 2 best cornerback tandems in all of college football matching up with Michigan and with Alabama. Let's check out the Bama defense. Number 18 in all of college football in total defense, and also number 18 in yards per play given up. The Tide faced some really good offenses. I guess this would be pretty good. LSU, number 1, and number 1 in yards per play. Georgia, top 10 in yards per play and in total yards. Texas, number 9 in yards per game, number 14 in yards per play. Ole Miss at number 15 and number 23. Tennessee was a top 20 offense in any way you measure it, yards per play, yards per game. The one bad offense that Alabama faced in the SEC in particular was against Arkansas, and the Hogs challenged Bama in the second half. They scored 3 straight times to make it a 24-21 ball game and really threatened Bama in the final 5 minutes under KJ Jefferson at the controls. But that Hogs offense, number 116 in total offense over the course of the year. But if you understand Arkansas's playmakers and KJ Jefferson, you know that they're really much better than 116, but just did not produce, but gave Bama a scare in the second half. So let's check out this Bama defense against the 3 best offenses they faced. LSU, Georgia, Texas. This LSU game in Tuscaloosa decided the SEC Western Division, and it was a shootout early, and then the Bama defense really took control. As we mentioned earlier, Jaden Daniels hit on 15 of 24 for 219. Garrett Nussmeier had to step in for Jaden Daniels. He was nicked up late in the third quarter in that game, and he was able to come back. Nussmeier hit on those 5 of 10 passes, so that's a pretty significant time in which Jaden Daniels had to leave the field, and that was the game and the point in the game in which Bama swung a close one into a bit of a comfortable lead. This game was 21-all at the half. You see Jaden Daniels did throw a pick that was deflected, and he also ran for 153 yards against the Bama defense and for a touchdown. As look at that yards per carry by the LSU rushing attack, which was basically Jaden Daniels. So if J.J. McCarthy wants to do that and he's able to do that, I'm not saying that J.J. is Jaden Daniels, but he certainly has some of those attributes. Bama had a difficult time covering Malik Neighbors, one of the best wide receivers in all of college football, 10 catches for $171 and a touchdown. His running mate is Brian Thomas, who was limited on that night, 3 for 36, did have a 23-yarder. Bama giving up 34 points at home against Texas is not a good look, but let's understand the interceptions by Jalen Milroe directly led to points, put Bama's defense in horrible field position. Quinn Ewers hit on 24 of 38 for 349 and 3 touchdowns as Bama's defense got lit up a bit at times. Jatavian Sanders is a monster, 5 catches for $114. He had a 50-yarder. A.D. Mitchell had a 39-yarder. Xavier Worthy a 44-yarder. I don't know that Michigan's wideouts, maybe the tight ends, will have some room in the middle, but the wide receivers stretching Bama's defense in their corners for those kind of plays, I don't necessarily see that happening. Texas running the ball, they were decent. Jonathan Brooks, 14 carries for 57 yards, just enough to keep the passing attack going and the defense honest. Now to the showdown in Atlanta against the Bulldogs. Georgia marched it down the field, 75-yard drive, touchdown, bam, 7-zip. Then the Alabama defense did not give up a touchdown until the fourth quarter, and not until they had a 2-score lead. Carson Beck threw for 243 yards, no touchdowns, no picks, 21 of 29. Pretty efficient, but not that dangerous downfield. Arian Smith had the 51-yarder you see there. They also hit for another 23 and 21-yarders downfield. Rushing attack, look at Georgia. Maybe the best offensive line in all of college football. Only went for 2.5 yards per carry. Kendall Milton, 13 for 42. Not a whole lot there. Deshaun Edwards, really good back. 10 carries, 38 yards. The Bama defense did a heck of a job in this game against Georgia. We know the Michigan ground attack was dominant in 2021 with Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum, and then in 22 with Corum and Donovan Edwards. And even though Corum led the nation in rushing touchdowns with 24 this season, Michigan less than dominant on the ground, struggling many times. 60th in the nation at less than 162 yards per game. And when you go to the yards per carry, 73rd in the country at 4.27. They did face these strong rushing defenses. Of course, Penn State, number 3 in the nation. Number 2 in yards per carry against. Nebraska, number 7 and number 7. Iowa, 14th in the nation in yards given up per game on the ground. And number 8 in yards per carry. Ohio State on the fringe at the top 20. Maryland in the top 40. The worst rush defense that Michigan faced was Minnesota. Surprisingly, the Golden Gophers playing extremely strong defense in recent years, but took a major tumble in 2023. The number 107 rush defense in the nation, better in yards per carry at number 75. How does Bama hold up against the run? Well, we last saw them in the regular season, at least, against the Auburn Tigers when Auburn had no threat of a passing attack, having difficulty against that Auburn rushing attack, which is pretty strong, and Bama faced some really good rushing attacks. LSU, number 8 in the nation and number 1 in yards per carry, thanks to Jaden Daniels. Tennessee at number 13 in yards per game, number 6 in yards per carry. Auburn ranks in the top 15 to 20 in both categories. Georgia fell back in terms of yards per game, but they threw the ball more with Carson Beck, and therefore the Georgia Bulldogs still a strong 18th in the country in rushing offense. So the Bama defense did a fine job against Georgia's rushing attack in that game. South Florida at number 30 would be surprising to me that they are 30th in the country in rushing, but they run the ball a lot because they're only number 83 in yards per attempt. There we see Texas. They're a top 25 rushing offense. Kentucky's only 96th in the nation in rushing offense. Get this, but they're number 25 in yards per carry. Michigan's passing numbers in regards to whole, large, total offense pass numbers are not going to wow anyone. But pass efficiency, J.J. McCarthy had a fine season. Had a couple trip-ups, Bowling Green, and elsewhere. But overall, excellent season by J.J. McCarthy, and Michigan's pass efficiency strong. Now, we know the narratives, and those are more important than the overall numbers. The Penn State game, Michigan came out. J.J. McCarthy, 7 of 8, throwing very conservative passes. Then they shut down the pass game because they trusted the defense in the running game and because Penn State's defensive line was devastating. They threw the ball well against Ohio State, 16 of 20. But again, they relied on the run. They had a lead for most of the game. Against Iowa, you grab a 2-score lead on the Hawkeyes and game over when you're as good as Michigan. Didn't have to throw it a whole lot. But again, they struggled in the pass game against the better defenses. So it was a combination struggling against some of those teams like a Maryland. We mentioned Penn State and Iowa as well, but also because of the game situation, relying on the defense, the run game. So let's look at Michigan in terms of pass efficiency. Number 5 in the nation. J.J. McCarthy, 21 touchdowns, 5 picks. The pass defenses they faced, and again, this is not total yardage because that's a misleading statistic. Teams have to throw the ball if they're behind. Teams give up a lot of passing yardage if they're ahead in a lot of games. So this is pass efficiency. Ohio State, number 3 in the country. Iowa, number 5. Penn State, 8. Nebraska, 15. Maryland in the top 20 in pass efficiency defense. And Rutgers at number 24. So Michigan faced 6 of the top 25 pass efficiency defenses in all of college football. And Bama's right there as well at number 17. Giving up just 14 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and Bama faced that number 1 pass offense out of LSU, another top 10 figure with Georgia, another top 12 pass efficiency offense with Jackson Dart and Ole Miss, and then also Texas in the top 20 with Quinn Ewers, who threw for 369 against Bama and 3 touchdowns. Let's also get a read on a couple other key statistics involving this game and this matchup because sometimes special teams are ignored. We're not going to run through all the punt return yardage, punt coverage, kickoff return yardage, and so forth, which has been minimized by recent rules changes, of course, in terms of kickoff returns, and even punt returns are less than they have been. And we've done those comparisons in past videos looking at the past 10 years of college football and how special teams have been minimized and changed. But let's look at the field goal kickers at least here with James Turner, 16 of 18 for Michigan. Will Reichard became the all-time point scorer in college football with 539. He has hit on 8 field goals in his career of at least 50 yards and 20 of 23 overall this season. Turnover margin could be critical. We know that the team that wins the turnover margin wins the game almost all the time, depending on whether it's +1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Michigan's +17 this year, Bama at +8. And then in regards to penalties, Michigan is the least penalized team in all of college football. Bama's about mid-tier at number 56. I was asked for and delivered a prediction on Michigan podcast a couple weeks ago. You can certainly check out that episode. Don't hold me to it because I will deliver my official prediction on Michigan, Alabama when we get closer to the game. But I certainly have a definite lean in this one. Please join us right here at the Voice of College Football. Leave those comments down below. Let me know what we missed, what we hit on, and what you would like to see right here at the Voice of College Football. So if I know Michigan fans, and I do, same as any college football fan base actually, there was a first practice you're telling us today, so they're probably demanding some type of report.
You know, they call it Fort Schembechler. At least they did under Lloyd Carr, and I think that's been very similar to the Jim Harbaugh era. I don't know if you're going to get a lot. I do know that I read that I believe Will Johnson is going to be, kind of gearing up after his injury against Ohio State and be ready to go against Alabama, which he will be very, very much needed with Milroe and his ability to extend plays. So getting Will Johnson back is going to be very nice for Michigan. But yeah, I mean, it's been kind of quiet, especially considering the previous 2 months or so of everything going around in Ann Arbor. It's been very quiet. I was thinking about that today. I'm like, I haven't really heard much, as far as outside noise, but sounds like they're ready. They're locked in, ready to go. And, there's a lot of recruiting, transfer portal stuff. So there's things going on, but it is relatively quiet around here.
Tanner, is there anyone else besides Will Johnson that we need to keep track of that Michigan fans are keeping their fingers crossed on?
Michigan has been relatively healthy this year. Unfortunately, as we saw in the Ohio State game, All-American, consensus All-American as of today, Zach Zinter goes down with a couple broken bones in his leg. So he's out, obviously. Other than that, though, I think it's just guys getting back healthy. I know, J.J. McCarthy played later in the year, a little banged up. I think that's why you didn't see as much in the designed run game for him. So getting him back healthy, getting his, I believe he had a knee issue that kind of, from what I had been told, it hindered him most of the year. It was something that he said was uncomfortable, but it was able to play through it. And so hopefully that's, with time and rest and rehab, that he's going to be able to be closer to 100%, as close as you can be at this part of the season, right? I mean, it's a long season for these guys, 12 games, 13 games. You're going to be banged up. You're never going to be as close to 100% as you are at the start of the year. So for him to get back to, somewhere where he was earlier in the year, I think is going to be big for Michigan's chances in this game. Him being in the run game, be able to kind of put some pressure on those Alabama linebackers to make decisions in the run game will be huge for Michigan. So, outside of that, though, I think it really is just guys kind of, dealing with some boo-boos, some bumps and bruises. Junior Colson, I think, had 2 casts on his hand at one point. I think somebody saw. So hopefully he can get his hands free, be able to not play in a cast. But yeah, I mean, Drake Nugent, the center, was a little dinged up against Iowa. He was questionable pregame, and he came off the field at one point in the Big Ten championship. Mason Graham also did, but he went back in, breathed a very large sigh of release when I saw him get back on the field, Mark. But yeah, I mean, I think these guys are relatively healthy as you can be at this point in the season, like I mentioned earlier.
Tanner Wooten stopping by to break down some Michigan football. Of course, the Wolverines do battle with Alabama. Huge matchup, college football playoff historically. All of it, all the components are there. Catch Tanner's work at Blue by 90. And, of course, subscribe here at the Voice of College Football. Please give us a like as well. The unit that could be counted upon more so than any on either side of the ball for 2+ seasons was the offensive line. And you alluded to Zach Zinter, enormous loss. They were able to rebound immediately from that loss in the moment against Ohio State, who had statistically one of the best rush defenses in the country. We can only, in a sense, try to gauge how much of that was just sheer adrenaline and picking up Zach Zinter's loss in the moment and fighting for him, and knowing that people had to step up. And then obviously there was another game to be played against Iowa, and the rushing attack wasn't that effective. But again, Iowa brings a top 5 rush defense to the table. There was a lot of shuffling over the latter portion of the season. Ladarius Henderson was injured, came back, I believe played the final 2 regular season games. So where do you think the offensive line stands? And do you think they're just simply replacing Zach Zinter and moving on, or they're trying to figure things out still?
I think it will be what it was in the latter part of that Ohio State game with Carson Barnhart sliding down to guard. Barnhart's more of a guard-shaped guy. He's not a 6'8", 310-pound athletic freak of a tackle that you kind of typically think of. He is, 6'4", 300-some pounds. He's a guy that I think will be better at guard than he was at tackle. As I'm sure when we were leading up to that game, I think that was a big concern if you're on the Michigan side of things of, is Barnhart at right tackle going to be able to stop some of these guys off the edge? He had a really rough day in Happy Valley dealing with Chop Robinson. So him sliding into guard. Trente Jones is an interesting case, Mark, because every time I watch Trente Jones, he's a 5th-year guy. He's been here his whole career. I just feel like he plays well. He's a good run blocker. He's serviceable as a pass protector. And I just always found it odd that he never found the field. He started in 2022 before he went down with an injury. He won the battle against Barnhart pretty easily in spring camp. I mean, it wasn't even a question according to insiders. Like there was no smoke. It was all Trente Jones. And so he loses his job because of injury. And then he was the jumbo O-line, putting on number 93, coming in, in some of their larger personnel sets. So he's a guy who has played a lot of football, played pretty well, and I think at right tackle he's going to be a guy. Now another player that I forgot to mention in kind of the walking wounded segment we did, Miles Hinton, transferring out of Stanford, younger brother of Michigan defensive tackle Chris Hinton. He played against Maryland when Ladarius Henderson was out and looked really, really good. So I don't know what his return does to kind of the formula for Michigan, but I have to imagine they're going to go with Henderson at left tackle, Keegan at left guard, Nugent at center, Barnhart at right guard, and Trente Jones at right tackle. Like that's what they did against Ohio State. That's what they did against Iowa. So it'll be interesting to see if they have any wrinkles in there. You know, they do love to bring in a 6th or 7th offensive lineman because they've had the depth. Now that depth is tested because Zach Zinner's out. You have to bring in Trente Jones as a starter. So now you have one extra offensive lineman who's kind of ready. There's a lot of younger guys who may not be at that level yet. So it'll be interesting to see what they dial up for Alabama here in the next couple of weeks.
Because as you well know, the running game has been dominant for 2+ years. This year, I was just doing some statistical comparisons and matchups against Bama, 72nd in the country in rush offense. Once I converted that to average yards per carry, I thought that might jump because they did throw the ball quite a bit more, especially earlier in the season, but not really. They were somewhere in that same range in terms of yards per carry. So 213 yards of total offense against Iowa. Again, Iowa's defense is really good. And Michigan could play conservative once they got the 2-score lead, and especially once they got the strip sack and then the touchdown in the next play, game over. So that makes for a different game plan. But still, are there concerns about where this offense is right now?
Not really. I think when you play Iowa, especially in a game like that, you are very aware of what their offensive situation is, right? And there's no real need to do anything too fancy. Now, to say that I was not concerned during that game would be a lie. I was very concerned. I'm a fingernail biter and was biting my fingernails in that game at Lucas Oil Stadium. But again, I think that Michigan kind of had a plan of, all right, we're up 10 points. Is Iowa going to be able to sustain drives? No. Michigan's defense played out of its mind. I know that Iowa offense is atrocious, but the Michigan defense really did their job and held up their end of the bargain. So no real concerns. Some of the play calling was very vanilla. And I try to have the rationale of, okay, well, maybe that's part of the game plan to beat Iowa, right? You don't need to drop 40 on them to win. It was kind of very reminiscent of that Penn State Iowa game in a way where it was just that defense was going to break eventually. And thanks to some Iowa turnovers, Michigan had short field opportunities to punch it in from the 10-yard line. But there were a couple plays where Colston Loveland has a big drop where he might have scored. And then there's also a drop from A.J. Barner that would have given them 1st and goal at the 5. Now, obviously, you can't do that. But if you want to think about it like that, make those 2 plays, that game maybe is 34-0, and it looks and feels a lot better. But because, one of the best tight ends in the country drops a ball, and, one of the best tight ends in the Big Ten drops the ball, then it looks a little bit worse than it is. So, but there were certainly some concerns with the pass pro, and I hope that they take the next couple of weeks to really kind of dial in on themselves and kind of find what was working earlier in the year, because obviously competition caveats apply, but they were moving the ball at will in the early and middle part of this season before they got to Penn State. And obviously that's when the competition ramped up, playing a lot better defenses. But I do think that there's a lot of success that this offense can have against Alabama. Bama gave up, 240 some rushing yards to Auburn the week before they played Georgia. So, there's definitely some opportunities there, I think, with those linebackers for the Crimson Tide. But, yeah, Michigan definitely needs to work on some things and kind of self-scout over the next few weeks and be ready for whatever Alabama is going to throw at them defensively. But, again, going back to McCarthy's, knee injury, hopefully he's able to be closer to 100%. They can use him in the run game, because when they do, that's when you can run it 32 straight times against Penn State and run for 230 some yards.
Tanner, do you have any theories about the bowl record after Harbaugh's first win, the first season against Florida? It's been all L's since then. A lot of people will say, me included, the playoff experience is much different. It's obviously a do or die situation more so than a bowl game. Not that you don't want to win the bowl games, and they haven't, of course, played in lower bowl games. They played in the kind of bowl games that you would want to win, especially, but it is different in the playoff. Your thoughts about what that could be?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at it through a maize and blue colored lens here, I think what I think about is you lose that last game. That means so much. And how difficult it is to get up for an Orange Bowl that doesn't mean as much as it used to in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, right, for example. And I think that 2016, they almost, they ended up coming back on Florida State, and then Florida State scored with 30 seconds left. I mean, it was a crazy game. 2018, They lose to Ohio
And
State.
not to
big
interrupt,
time.
Tanner, but
Yeah.
I'm interrupting, I guess. Jake Butt out of that game, Jabril Pepper,
Right.
correct?
Yes. I was 21 at that point, Mark. So I believe that was New Year's Eve. I think we may have had some other things that we were worried about other than that game, but I wanted to win it. But I think we had some plans after that game, so a little fuzzy on the details. But yeah, like you said, no Jabril. He was out for that whole game. Jake Butt goes down in that game. And yeah, I mean, I think you can really attribute it to those bowl games that aren't the college football playoff as, hey, you've lost to Ohio State, you've lost your opportunity to win the Big Ten. Everything you wanted in that season is now gone, because in 16 and 18, they would have went to the playoffs if they had won that game against Ohio State. They didn't. So now you got to go to the Orange Bowl. I can't remember what they played Florida in Dan Mullen's first year. They got smoked. I mean, so I that's what I kind of attribute it to. But the last 2 years, 2021, Georgia, I mean, they're basically playing the Philadelphia Eagles out there after the last couple of drafts, right? Get their rear end kicked, and that was just a better football team, better coach, better players, faster, stronger, more athletic. Like, yeah, I could go on and on. But last year was really disappointing. And I'm going to take off the homer glasses because I heard a lot of talk from the Michigan players and players that I really appreciate and really have loved watching. But I heard a lot of talk about how we're going to go ground and pound TCU's 3-3-5 defense. And that, again, put up 45 points, right? But the opportunities that lost in that game, a 4th and goal, you run the Philly special on the first drive of the game. I'm in the stands. I'm at that game, Mark. I'm losing my mind. I'm in the TCU section, by the way, so that was a lot of fun. But then you fumble it on an exchange, 1st and goal after the Roman Wilson overturned touchdown, and you give away at least 3 points, if not 7. So I don't know what it was last year. The defense really just, the Quentin Johnson touchdown that went for like 80 yards. They had no safety help. DB misses a tackle. They really ran the ball down Michigan's throat. So I don't know what it was last year. I don't know if, I thought going into last year that would be a much, obviously, easier opponent for them. And I thought that they would win that game. And they come out, they came out flat. I mean, they put up a lot of points, but they were down, 21-6. They were down 14-0. I mean, they were down like 41-22. It was a weird scoring game. And so I just don't know what to attribute last year to. I don't know if they just were overconfident. I don't know. I mean, obviously you had the 2 picks from McCarthy, which he still was the reason that they were even in that game at the end, because he played his tail off in that one. But yeah, I don't know what to attribute last year to. I really have a reason for the previous however many, but last year was kind of interesting. I was talking to Justin Rowe of Blue by 90. We were having a conversation this week on the phone, and somebody had brought it up on our Twitter, and we were talking about it, and I was like, man, I think if Michigan plays that game, and he made this point, Michigan plays that game 10 times against TCU, they may win 7 or 8, but they made too many mistakes in that game. So I don't know what it was. I really don't know what to attribute last year to, but it was clearly Georgia went out and smoked them. I think Michigan was capable of doing, not to that degree, but I think they were capable of winning by a couple scores, and they just didn't capitalize on the opportunities that they had.
Yeah, 7 or 8, I think, is pretty much the consensus of what Michigan would win in that matchup in 10 games. I think that's pretty fair. But TCU obviously won where it counts. I'm still trying to get past picturing you in the TCU section. How did you figure that one out?
So it was a gift from my father-in-law. So my in-laws and my parents both live in Arizona, coincidentally, which is very nice for travel, for holiday stuff. So my father-in-law, when we find out it's going to be the Fiesta Bowl, he says, hey, Christmas gift, we're going to the game. And I'm like, awesome. And I greatly appreciate it. But he just got the TCU section. I don't know if he looked that hard at it. So I gave him a little bit of crap, but, he bought the tickets for Christmas. So I'm not going to sit here and complain. And honestly, the TCU fans around me were super gracious, super kind. But Mark, I'm 6'5". I have a Mays Michigan Jordan hoodie on. And on the first play, when Donovan Edwards, I thought was going to score, I may have said some things to the people behind me talking about their 3-3-5 defense. But that's how it happened. Most of them were great. Their students were a little rowdy. I don't know what it was about their students. They all were wearing jean shorts and cowboy boots. I'm like, you're in Dallas, man. Come on. You're not out on the ranch in West Texas. So, but it was a great time. The TCU fans were really cool around us for the most part. They were just super excited to be there and to win the game. And I was just, I was down bad, as the kids would say, Mark. It was a tough walk back to that car, and then a red-eye flight home out of Phoenix back to Detroit was not the most pleasant flight I've ever had. So, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you always take that risk when you go to the big games and you travel and go through all that. It's the coming home that could be a bit rough.
I'll tell you this, man. We talked about it after the Ohio State-Michigan game, but after, I've had my fair share of road losses or neutral site losses, man. When I was leaving, I was trying to be very, very kind to the Ohio State fans because I know how much that stinks, because you go there and you're so excited and, it doesn't go your way and you've got to get back home and go back to real life and reality and stuff. And I'm like, man, I know exactly what that feels like all too well. So yeah, it gave me some perspective on just kind of, it is what it is, when you go to those games and you lose. I've been to some road games where Michigan's lost. I've been to some road games where they've won. And, you just kind of take the lumps with it and, just try to remember it's just a football game at the end of the day.
There you go. Well, we've got another one of those folks 3 weeks from right now. Tanner Wooten, Blue by 90. Tanner, let people know where to find you.
Yeah, you can check me out on Twitter at Tanner Wu-Tang. You can follow Blue by 90 at Blue by 90. You can check out our podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Google, Amazon. I think we're everywhere. And then blueby90.com. You can check out our written content.
All right, Tanner. Don't be surprised if I give you another ring before kickoff.
I love it. Appreciate it, Mark.
Third consecutive college football playoff appearance for Michigan. They want to do it right, get a win. It's going to be a difficult challenge, of course. Taking on Alabama at the Rose Bowl. It should be quite the spectacle and quite the game. We got Nelson Hubble on the line. Maize and Blue review on Rivals is the place to check out Nelson's work. Nelson, how are we doing today?
Doing great, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Appreciate you being here. Want to get revved up on Michigan and Bama. We'll get there in a second. First, National Signing Day is less than a week away.
Definitely not on the decommit side. It feels that way. I feel pretty strongly about everyone that's in the class right now. And I'm not expecting really any late additions. You never know. Sometimes there are those surprises. And before when Kentucky was about to have, almost lost their head coach to A&M. Instead, they get Mike Elko from Duke, right? Gerard Smith, Jacob Smith were two brothers that are committed down to Kentucky. And then the thought was, hey, and it was pretty, strong opinions that, well, if Kentucky's without their guy, those two players, both of the Smith brothers almost came up to Michigan anyways. So that's the thought was that, hey, they'll lean that way. But no changes there at Kentucky. No changes at Michigan. It seems like nothing's, movement wise. I'm not expecting any late commits, but who knows?
Nelson, of course, anybody's evaluation of this class or any class starts with the ranking. That's only a small part of the story, though. So in regards to their targets, who they really wanted, positional needs, all of that put into play, are you feeling good about this class?
I think they're filling their spots. I mean, you look at the running back position, the quarterback position. You've got Jordan Marshall coming in. You've got Jaden Davis. He had an up and down Elite 11, and that sort of knocked his ranking a bit. But he had a very good year. And Jordan Marshall, also very, very good year. He didn't have a single game where he had under 100 total yards. Most of those games, I think he only had one that he didn't rush for 100 in this season. And so he was the bell cow over at Archbishop Moeller down in Cincinnati. Jaden Davis down in North Carolina at Providence Day had a really good year. So those two guys are going to move in as Michigan may lose McCarthy. And then, that I'm still very unsure about, to be honest. I think there's a possibility there that he comes back, especially with NIL and depending on the success of the season. And there's a loaded quarterback class this year. He could position himself to be the prize guy next season. So I wait to see on that. Obviously, Quinn Ewers seems to be coming back. So there, are two possible guys if he does return, him and Ewers. But as it relates to the class, they're filling their spots. And they're loading up in the trenches. No surprise with that. Would like to see a little bit more cornerback help. That, it has been something that they really committed to last year. And so maybe they didn't feel so much of a need to this year. Maybe they'll look to the portal. We'll see. But as you might lose Josh Wallace, who I think is in his last year, might have a COVID year. coming from Massachusetts now, and then Will Johnson's back. But again, you want to develop that depth there beneath those two guys. But Michigan's shaping up pretty good here. Not a ton of high-level stars. Davis would be considered that. I think Jordan Marshall would be considered that. Number 2 running back in the country, arguably number 1. We could see some movement by season's end for some of the high school action, which is starting to just wrap up, I think, this weekend. But we'll see how that all plays out. I think Michigan feels good about where they're at. I'm looking at it, and you're obviously going to have some turnover, but they also have the ability, as we saw last year, to add guys through the portal and some really high-level players. And so that's going to be something to watch for more. Haven't heard a ton of whispers on that, but we'll see as the season ends and Michigan gets a little bit more active there, and some of those players from these high-level programs maybe get through their bowl games, bowl prep, and sort of step out. Because some of these guys are going to wait until the end. So we'll see how that plays out. But portal is where I've got more of a focus, honestly, than this recruiting class as it relates to impact next season.
All right. So you go to the portal, and that's one of the reasons why these recruiting rankings don't mean what they once did. Of course, certain teams are more successful going to the portal. Michigan, one of those teams. Offensive line, defensive line. You mentioned Josh Wallace, cornerback, third cornerback that was able to come to Michigan through the portal. So refresh my memory on this. Michigan has done little in the portal this particular cycle thus far. Most of those key additions, with Michigan being in the playoff, did those come after spring practice?
Some of them did. Yes, some of them did. And there was some of that early addition. I don't remember. I'm trying to recall who they added earlier on. Someone who I don't think, maybe it was Wallace. It might have been Wallace. But they did add, it was a spring practice, that window after spring practice. They were able to bring in some of those guys, bring in a couple of Stanford guys last year. Ladarius Henderson comes over. And so the thing with that is you're waiting a long time, and coaches have been out on the recruiting trail, and they've been trying to, solidify this class, this regular recruiting class. We'll see how the portal class shapes up. But Walter Nolan is going to be the guy that I'm looking at right now. I believe right now is the number 1 player in the portal, defensive tackle out of Texas A&M now. And so he's in the portal, and Michigan had really, really good chances with him and his commitment in the first place. Jump back. I think this was his first year at A&M. So was it last season or 2 years ago at this point, whenever he committed? I think it was 2 years ago. And so Nolan now, Michigan has that in already. And if anything, their defensive line is a little stacked returning next year. I mean, if you're bringing back Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, and both those guys are only sophomores. And so you're going to bring those guys back. And now if you could add a guy like Nolan, the thought is we have something here on defense that we feel like we can lean on more than we have within that position group in years prior. So now you're able to parlay what you've done this year at defensive line into next season, which has been a strength for the team. So Nolan is the guy to watch for me. If you're a Michigan fan, you should be begging for the school to go after this guy. And I think they are, because Nolan is one of the premier players in the country at defensive tackle, and he will be that next year, I think. Definitely in the portal right now.
8.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks for Walter Nolan, who was one of the top 5 or 10 players in the nation. Not one of the top 5 or 10 defensive linemen, one of the top 5 or 10 players in the nation who ultimately signed with that Texas A&M class that was so historic, the number 1 rated class in history of rankings in 2022. Got Nelson Hubble here from Maize and Blue Review. So catch his work right there on Rivals. Of course, this is the time to lock in on Michigan football. Even if you're not a Michigan fan, if you want to catch up with all that's going on at the high end of college football playoff appearance, of course, for a 3rd consecutive year against Alabama. Nelson, before we start to grind it down to nuts and bolts, X's and O's, this is a fairly daunting challenge from a historical standpoint, meaning Nick Saban doesn't lose too many of these kind of games. That's just the history of it. I'm trying to think. So last time they lost a postseason game, they lost the national championship game, but that was to Georgia. who was a historically good team. They lost to Trevor Lawrence and Clemson when they went 15-0. These are the kind of games they're losing. Deshaun Watson's Clemson team in 2016. Otherwise, they're completing the deal, winning national championships or finishing their postseason with a bowl win over Michigan, 2019, Kansas State, 2022. Just the postseason record for Nick Saban. He obviously knows how to prepare his team over a 1-month span, and that would be challenging in and of itself. Of course, Jim Harbaugh, that's the one thing that he has yet to show that he's figured out is the bowl situation, regardless of the magnitude of it, where he's lost them all since that initial Florida win in 2015.
Yep.
So your thoughts about that situation?
Yeah, it's one of those things where that's maybe the final, monkey on Jim Harbaugh's back. If you think about what he has accomplished, hasn't accomplished, I don't put the expectation of a national championship on coaches because it's such a difficult thing to do. So when you're thinking about something that you should be able to do, it's at a school like Michigan, the expectation is you win bowl games, and at least with semi-regularity. Hey, let's maybe get a 50-50 split here, but that's not even been close to what's gone on. And frankly, I haven't been impressed with Michigan for almost any of those bowl appearances except for that Florida game. I mean, they did get blown out against Alabama. It's a much closer game than it seemed. I think the final was something like 28-12 or something like that. I don't remember what it was.
35-16.
Okay, 35-16. There was right. So, and what happened there, I know there was a late touchdown in that game, and Alabama led most of that second half, but it was Michigan and Alabama right in it. The first half, you felt like, hey, I don't even know why Michigan's in this game. Watching how they played, the roster differences there, and that was a down year for Alabama. Now, when you look at Saban, obviously the success is there, and he has that resume, and he knows how to approach these things. And Harbaugh, this is sort of new territory for him as it relates to the playoff, and he's figuring it out right now. And that's what he's been trying to do the last 2 years. I think last season was a fluke. The Georgia game 2 years ago, no surprises there. That was not a shocker to me at all that they got rolled in the way that they did. But last year felt a little different. It felt like it was just some silly mistakes, maybe a lack of focus, and those 2 pick sixes, are killer. And so Michigan really should have won that game. I think that's been, rehashed enough. But coming into this season, it feels like both these teams are very evenly matched. So when you talk about the coaching battle, that has even more of an impact than it ever has. And now I'm pretty confident that Michigan will be prepared for this game, and Alabama will also look like one of their better selves. And so, especially if you look at the numbers, I mean, what these two teams have done this year, they're very evenly matched. The style of play from both these teams, not too far off. Defensively, Michigan is a much better defense than Alabama, but Alabama's still not. They're starting to shape up on defense late in the season. So we'll see which version of them comes out against Michigan. I'd expect their best. I'd expect the version that we saw against Georgia or something close to it. And so we'll see how Michigan can respond, and if they have the willpower, I guess, on offense and defense to sort of hang in there if they get punched in the mouth. Which is what I think Alabama is going to look to do early. So we'll see what happens. Otherwise, it could be a really grinded out game. It could be one of those, both teams are going to lean on the things that they trust, and that's running the ball. And we're going to see if it goes down late into the fourth quarter, which is what I expect. So that's where I think the quarterback battle has an impact.
In most respects, it's useless to try to compare what happened in 2019 in the Citrus Bowl to 4 years later. Completely different rosters, of course, but they are the same programs. And one correlation I'll make that should make Michigan fans feel better is even though that Alabama team did not make the playoffs, they were probably a better team. They were probably a more talented team. They lost 2 games. This team could have lost 2 games. That team came within a clank off an upright of making the playoffs or losing to Joe Burrow and LSU. Yes, by 5 points. So I'm mixing up. No, I'm not mixing up years. Yeah, coming within 5 points of coming against Joe Burrow and company. So while Michigan is a much, much better team than they were in 2019. So looking at just level of play performance, that gap has been closed. Now, Michigan's offensive line, which has been a strength, wasn't necessarily strength at times down the stretch. A lot of shuffling, injuries, lose one of the best in the land in Zach Zinter, unfortunately, for this game. Again, a place where I would think you and other people were secure. Would there be some concerns there now?
Yeah. So I definitely also, back to what you said a little bit there as well, as the trajectory of these programs is a little different than it was back then too. Michigan feels like they're, Alabama's been pretty steady. Michigan feels like they're on an incline here, and they have been. So that helps. You've built that momentum year after year. But when you talk about the offensive line and you look at what they've done this year, I haven't been nearly as impressed as I expected to be, frankly, going into the year. I thought Michigan would play much better on the line of scrimmage on offense. And they have the talent. And that's maybe the most frustrating thing is they weren't moving people this year and haven't been to the same degree that I think we all expected them to, especially with some of the players that they brought in. Now, the most important position on their offensive line, Drake Nugent at center, I think is very solid, and I don't think that's a concern, which is a good thing. It's been tackle play and in the run game and in pass protection a little bit. Ladarius Henderson seems to have finally got his feet set and settled in at left tackle. At right side, Carson Barnhart. For much of this season, especially going back to that Penn State game when you're first tested, and even as long back as Rutgers, I wasn't impressed with how he played. And Michigan's, to their credit, stuck with him and tried to get that solidified up front. And part of the problem there is in camp and fall camp, you're just rotating guys through all the time. That whole offensive line on the outside, both your right tackle, left tackle, and your center, you're just rotating different guys. I mean, you had such a battle there. And with so many talented players, they didn't play together as long as they needed to. And then you get in season, and so you're hoping to make those adjustments, make those improvements, and they did look a little better as the season went on. And then you hit Penn State, and your offensive line can't pass block. So definitely a concern. Alabama's defense is nowhere near as frightening as it has been in years past, which bodes well for Michigan. But their defense is still fine. They're decent, but much better defense than a lot of the Big Ten has put forward. And so, it is a concern. I think what's going to happen here is we're going to see where these teams made their biggest strides given the 3 weeks or so that they have, 3 or 4 weeks from Championship Sunday or Championship Saturday, all the way up to the Monday night that they're going to play. I believe it's Monday at 5:30 or 5. I think the game is. So we're going to wait and see. I wonder if there's going to be any shuffling because fall camp, plenty of movement, right? Then you get to the break here, and younger guys sometimes push for spots, or some people who've maybe been on the bench all season long. Usually happens in skill positions more than on the line of scrimmage. It's possible. So, hey, maybe someone like Miles Hinton does steal that right tackle job, especially when you move Barnhart to guard and Jones, stays at right tackle. Maybe someone else moves in at guard. I'm curious to see how things change. I don't expect it will, but that possibility is also on the table.
So while these teams appear to be evenly matched, Vegas believes that they're evenly matched with the last I checked, a 1.5 point spread.
Mm-hmm.
Is there either an optimistic area that you are looking and hoping that Michigan takes advantage of, or a huge area of concern where you think that as you get more comfortable and acquainted with Alabama personnel, that you think either Michigan can take advantage of this, they're far better here, or I hope Alabama doesn't see this, take advantage of that?
Well, let's start with the optimistic approach for sure. Quarterback position, I know statistically Milroe and JJ McCarthy are pretty similar, but Michigan has the advantage there to me very clearly. Their play style hasn't forced them to pass as much, and McCarthy has been banged up since he played Penn State. And he has had an ankle injury, and so he's been dealing with that, and he seemed to be a little bit healthier against Ohio State. But then, last week against Iowa, I wasn't so sure. And so the more I watch him and when he's healthy versus when he's not healthy, which has been something that Michigan keeps under wraps pretty well. And it's sort of like a rumor, sort of a whisper, like he's got this injury, but he's going to play. And he always just says, I'm feeling great, whatever, going into the week, as any player should, if you're not trying to give your opponent any sort of advantage as to your ability to run the ball as a quarterback, because that's something that we just haven't seen from him. And so McCarthy has not been much of a runner this year, and that is a component that Michigan has not put on tape very much that I think they're going to break out here in this playoff. And I think that is the thing that they've been sort of sandbagging and holding on to all season long, because they haven't needed it. And against Ohio State, you saw Alex Orji come in and run the ball, which implied to me, number one, what kind of confidence they have in Orji, but also that JJ is not in any shape to be needing to run him. And so Orji gives that threat. The thing is, it's an obvious run when he's in. So would he get more touches against Alabama just to bring in a different component to this offense? I think it's entirely possible. And I also think that if he has the opportunity to throw the ball, it's going to be play action, deep shot, something like that. But Orji has a cannon, so he can throw the ball. It's the accuracy that's the problem. Very much like Joe Milton was when he came into Michigan. Milton, pretty good runner, thrower, not very accurate at all. Orji seems to have, he's a little bit better of a runner than Milton. His touch in the passing game, we just haven't seen. So I'm not sure what to expect there, but I think the quarterback position is a difference for Michigan. Now, Milroe has been playing better and better as the season's gone on, but I just think having McCarthy been here before, seen it as a guy sitting on the bench and as a guy in the games, he's made the mistakes, right? He very clearly made the mistakes against TCU. He threw those pick sixes. So now he has the chance to lean on that experience and also to capitalize on an opportunity that he's had in front of him before, whereas Milroe is going to show up to something that he's never dealt with in his life. And let's not pretend that the playoff is any different game because it's just like any other game. Coaches will say it, coach speak, there are some coaches I've heard a phrase that they say is, go 1 for 1, right? That's a very common phrase. We're just going to go 1-1 this week. We're just going to focus on this game. And that's not what really happens behind the scenes. They do look ahead. So my point is, this is a whole spectacle, and the spectacle of the playoff does impact people, does impact mindsets, does impact a player when he steps onto the field for the first time in the Rose Bowl. A player from Alabama at Alabama, but Milroe, who, Alabama's never played in the Rose Bowl, and have they even played in the Rose Bowl? I'm not sure. It's been a very long time, if at all, right? So it's the first time, because it's always ACC and Pac-12, I believe, before that, and or whoever the Big Ten had their contract with the Rose Bowl. So this is an entirely new environment for him, and I think that does give Michigan an advantage on maybe the mental side of things. And I think McCarthy is a far more polished passer than Milroe is, but he's gotten better this year.
Nelson Hubble, Maize and Blue Review, breaking down Michigan football on a daily basis. He and the rest of the crew there on the Rivals platform from Michigan Athletics. Nelson, appreciate you being here. If we don't see you in the meantime, Merry Christmas, and I hope you enjoy your holiday.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mark.
Bama, Michigan. Who wins and why? Right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by for the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. We are 21-6 in our college football playoff predictions. Straight up going back to 2014. We are 21-12 against the spread in our bowl predictions. Hopefully you're getting our bowl predictions and you're doing quite nicely, as you did in the regular season as well. You can get all our predictions by being a member on a Patreon or right here as a YouTube channel member. Let's get right to it, considering that this is probably the best Michigan team since 1997. This is possibly, you could argue, we shall see how it plays out over the next possible 2 games for Bama, the worst tied team since 2010, 2008. This is not vintage Bama, but this may turn out to be the national championship team. Check out our stats comparison. We took a deep dive on Michigan Bama in the various statistical categories. We have left that link in the comments section. All right, let's first get to it. Understanding that Michigan's been the more dominant team and the more consistent team. They've really only had one letdown game. That was the penultimate game against Maryland on the road. They only won by a touchdown. They got 2 key turnovers on defense that were pretty much decisive in winning that game, and a blocked punt as well in defeating the Terps. Otherwise, the close calls were against the top 10 teams that they played in Penn State on the road, although they controlled the game certainly, and Ohio State a narrow 30-24 win against what is probably at full capacity a top 5 team in the country. Alabama, though, let's even push to the side the Texas performance, and of course Texas is right here in the college football playoffs, so there is no shame in losing to the Longhorns. But that USF effort that went to 3-3 in the fourth quarter before winning 17-3, push that aside. Different Alabama team. Alabama still struggled against the likes of Texas A&M on the road. Talented Aggies team, but still, Alabama needed to run out the clock in the final few minutes to salt that game away 26-20. That could have been a loss. They were trailing at halftime of that game. Arkansas came back with 3 consecutive scores in the second half in Tuscaloosa and pushed the Tide to the brink before Bama was able to run out the clock, much like they did against the Aggies with a 4-minute drive on the ground. And then, of course, the 4th and 31 miracle on the Plains against Auburn. This Bama team probably should not be in the college football playoff. Auburn should have been able to play good enough defense on 4th and goal from the 31-yard line to keep Bama out of the end zone. But Jalen Milroe made the perfect pass. Isaiah Bond made the perfect corner catch by the pylon to help Bama escape. And then they played their perfect game, put it all together when they needed to. And this is the mark of Nick Saban teams. Playing the number 1 team in the country, the 2-time defending national champion. Bama didn't just win that game. They didn't just pull it out. They grabbed a 2-score lead after giving up an opening 75-yard touchdown drive to Georgia. They took control of that game, and they led by 2 scores. And anytime Georgia got within 1 score, Bama came right back and took a 2-score lead until Georgia scored that final touchdown to narrow the gap to 27-24. And then what did Bama do? They did it again. 3-minute drive, couple first downs converted, 1 on the legs of Jalen Milroe, and they salted the game away. This is not a 27-24 win against the number 1 team in the country that they had to withstand a drive into the red zone to hold on for the win. They had a 2-score lead for much of the game, and they salted it away. They controlled the game against Georgia. Impressive performance by Bama. And keep in mind that Bama has posted national championships in seasons 2015, 2017, 2021. The 21 team, of course, lost in the final 4 minutes to Georgia and did not win the national championship. But the point being, they showed themselves worthy of a college football playoff appearance, even though they were mighty shaky. Check out those seasons. I'm not going to run through all the results now, but against the likes of marginal Auburn teams and other results happening within the SEC in 2015 in that Ole Miss Arkansas game that ushered, you could call it luck, you can call it fortune, but Bama was able to make their way to the college football playoff. And then what happened? They took advantage and they showed that they belonged. And this could be a similar situation. J.J. McCarthy played a sterling game throwing the football against Ohio State, 16 of 20. And of course, the 1 touchdown throw that opened up the game 14-3 was a remarkable throw that the NFL scouts are drooling over. Aside from that performance, though, even though JJ was strong this season, he was a much better quarterback early in the season, and he had his issues down the stretch, especially that game on the road against Maryland, in which he got picked off a couple times and then also was barely over 50% completion percentage. So J.J. McCarthy has to play the game of his life. He also, I believe, I may be proven wrong in this one, has to be a runner. And he's capable of being a runner. The difference between Ohio State and Michigan this year was J.J. McCarthy, the guy that can escape the pocket and then throw on the run downfield accurately, and the guy that can escape the pocket and pick up a first down. He's an athlete. There's no question about that. Go back to Michigan's last performance against an SEC team. Cade McNamara could not handle the Georgia defense in 2021. Put in J.J. McCarthy during garbage time, and he showed that an elite athlete against an elite defense at least has a chance. J.J. McCarthy as a runner could be key in this game against Bama. But on the other side, the flip side, Jalen Milroe is just a dude that Michigan has not seen. This Michigan defense has not seen Jalen Milroe, not just in 2023. They've not seen that kind of player at quarterback their entire careers. Max Duggan would be the closest in regards to an effective runner, a guy that was a tough runner with speed. But Jalen Milroe, athlete, body build, Cam Newton-esque. Michigan has not seen this. Nothing close to it. Gavin Wimsatt of Rutgers would be the closest matchup for the Michigan defense. So they are going to have to adjust significantly. And I'm guessing that their backup quarterback, Alex Orji, who could come into the game and present a challenge to the Michigan defense or the Alabama defense, of course, could be the wild card in this and in regards to preparation, allowing the Wolverines to see something close to what they will see with Jalen Milroe. Milroe was not a good quarterback back in September when he faced Texas. Then he got pulled against South Florida, did not play that game against the Bulls. But then he progressively got better and better and better and better and showed us very early on that he is one of the elite downfield throwers in college football. He's right there with Caleb Williams, Michael Penix, Jalen Milroe, can throw the deep ball. And not that he doesn't just have a howitzer, he can put it on a dime. But what has not been regarded here recently in recent weeks is Jalen Milroe has improved as a intermediate thrower. Still not elite, and he's eliminated the mistakes. And the key to Alabama's season, and I've said it the entire season, even though I had a few Michigan fans that accused me of just jumping on the Jalen Milroe train here since the college football playoff selections were made. No. Let's be accurate. Go back to the very beginning of Alabama's win streak. What did I say? Alabama has figured it out. First, I predicted that Nick Saban and Alabama would figure it out, that they would come up with an identity that would fit Jalen Milroe. And then we noted it week to week to week to week. I am on record as saying Bama's going to the national championship game, and they're going to do it because they are going to be able to discard the part of the playbook that Jalen Milroe cannot execute. They're not going to make him Peyton Manning, have to read and dissect the defense. Nope. Throw it deep or run. Although he's getting better at the intermediate throws. The Bama offensive line had issues early in the season. Of course, Caden Proctor is the guy that everyone picked on at left tackle, the five-star freshman, but he has improved considerably. The Bama running game, and this is another one of note in the opening theme and storyline that I put out there, that this Bama team may be the worst Nick Saban has ever put on the field, or certainly one of the 2 or 3 worst teams. And it's also because of the running back position. Bama has regularly posted one of the great running backs in college football. Najee Harris, Trent Richardson, Derrick Henry. We could go on and on and on and on and on. Harris would be the most recent. Roydale Williams is really good. Jace McCullen leads the Tide attack on the ground with over 800 yards. Had to miss much of the SEC championship game, but it seems as though he's ready to go. Justice Haynes is the guy that Bama fans want to see as the 5-star freshman. I don't know that he's ready to shoulder the load. You got Jam Miller, so they've got a bunch of backs that have 4- and 5-star rankings. So the issue has not been recruiting, but these guys have just been regular running backs. We have not seen the guys that I just mentioned or a Jahmyr Gibbs coming out of the backfield for Bama. So the offensive line, the running backs, certainly the wide receivers are not vintage Bama. This wide receiver core cannot be confused with Jalen Waddle, Jamison Williams, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, those guys, Jerry Jeudy. No. But this is a better wide receiver core that have made plays and at least hung onto the ball better than the 2021 and 22 Bama teams that let down Bryce Young. Isaiah Bond in particular, 44 catches, 14 yards per catch, and 4 touchdowns. Has pulled down some of the more important passes this season. On the flip side, Michigan, a wide receiver with Cornelius Johnson, 42 catches, 4 touchdowns. Roman Wilson, of course, the big play threat, 41 catches, 11 touchdowns. However, because of Bama being so strong, and I believe that these two teams present the two best cornerback tandems in college football. Kool-Aid McKinstry, Terrion Arnold for Bama. Will Johnson, Mike Sanderstill have combined for 8 interceptions and 3 taken to the house. But Bama, I believe, is better equipped, with Bond in particular, to challenge Johnson and Sanderstill. I do not believe that Michigan receivers are going to challenge and make huge plays against those Bama corners. However, this is where Michigan needs to find Colston Loveland. He cannot catch 3 passes and Michigan wins this game. A.J. Barner, not the athlete that Colston Loveland is, but still capable in the passing game, 22 catches as the transfer from Indiana. Barner and Loveland need to be targeted, and they need to be utilized as mismatches against safeties and slot corners and linebackers. Colston Loveland needs to be targeted more like 10 or 12 times and catch 6, 7, 8, 9 passes for Michigan to be successful in the passing game. Because will Michigan be able to run it against Bama? Blake Corum had a fine season. He ran in a ton of touchdowns inside the 5-yard line, 24 to lead the nation. But Blake Corum saw his yards per carry average decline from 5.9 last year to 4.7. And Donovan Edwards, who was the star in replacing Corum last year in the college football playoff run and in the big wins against Illinois, Ohio State, and Purdue, has completely disappeared as a runner. He could be a threat in the passing game to supplement Loveland and Barner against what could be taken away in that wide receiver versus cornerback matchup. So Donovan Edwards more as a receiver, not the guy that averaged 3.5 yards per carry this season as a runner after averaging almost 8 yards per carry last year. What's happened to Donovan Edwards, I don't know. But Alabama's going to be able to contain, I believe, the Michigan ground game. That's why JJ's got to be a runner, and that's why Donovan Edwards has to be utilized as a receiver, because Michigan's going to have to generate offense in somewhat unconventional, non-traditional ways. I mentioned that Bama does not have the emergence of a elite All-American runner, and that Michigan defensive front, even though Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo 2 years ago were stars on both ends, this Michigan defensive line, both from a run-stopping standpoint and also a pass rush standpoint, coming from various players, Jalen Harrell, the most heralded, and Braden McGregor, that it's going to be difficult for Bama to run against Michigan in a traditional running back sense as well. That's why Jalen Milroe is the wild card and the X factor in this game. James Turner and Will Reichard both make their kicks. That should not be an issue for either team, although pressure gets to some players. Let's look at the talent. It's not comparable, not in terms of elite talent. Bama's got it all over Michigan. And we know that you generally have to be one of the 3 most talented teams in the country to win a national championship. But there are exceptions. But those exceptions typically lie in the top 10. And then those exceptions also come along with an elite quarterback, a generational player like Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, Cam Newton going back to 2010 Auburn, probably the least talented national championship team in the last 20 or 25 years. Michigan, according to the 247 Sports Composite, has the 14th most talented team in college football, and Bama is number 2. That's a huge favor to Alabama, although there is a component here in play that I don't believe is being measured accurately enough at this point of the game, and it's the introduction of the transfer portal that Michigan has taken full advantage of and added key components, especially along the offensive line, that have proven to be the difference in surpassing Ohio State in the Big Ten. Also, let's look at the 2 coaches. Jim Harbaugh's postseason record at Michigan is deplorable at 1-6. However, do I believe that Jim Harbaugh is a good enough coach to prepare a team for a college football playoff game? Yes, I do. I, unlike a lot of Michigan fans, was defending Jim Harbaugh in 2020. When most Michigan fans wanted him out, I was defending his career, his legacy, and his ability to do something with this program because he's done it with Stanford, the San Francisco 49ers. If he can prepare NFL teams for playoff games in the NFC, going to NFC championship games, winning an NFC championship game, and coming within one score, one throw in the end zone from winning a Super Bowl, then he knows how to prepare teams for big games and postseason games. However, it's just not being done right now at Michigan. I'm sure he's analyzed that. I'm sure he's tweaked it. I'm sure he's looked at it. It's been much talked about, and we'll see if Michigan can finally get over the hump there. On the flip side, he's facing the worst possible matchup in terms of preparation for a postseason game in Nick Saban. Nick Saban is 9-4 in the college football playoff. He is 13-4 in playoff games and BCS national championship games. 13-4. Basically, you have to have an ultra-talented special team, a special team to beat Nick Saban. Those 4 losses during the playoff era: 2014 Ohio State, which was just abounding with NFL stars all over the place. 2016 Clemson with a generational quarterback in Deshaun Watson. Ditto 2018 Clemson, Trevor Lawrence. 2021 Georgia with the best defense in college football over the last 25 years. You got to be special to beat Nick Saban in the playoffs. I don't know if that's Michigan. Again, my playoff record is 21-6 straight up. My bowl record this year, 21-12 against the spread. And you know, with the opt-outs, that has not been easy. Hopefully you're getting my picks over on Patreon or as a YouTube channel member right here. But here's a freebie. Too much Bama, too much talent, too much Nick Saban. Your final score: Bama 31, Michigan 20. Leave your comments below right here at the Voice of College Football. 5 days and counting. College football playoff semifinal Rose Bowl game. Alabama 12-1. Champions of the SEC, the Big Ten champions. Michigan 13-0. Entering the CFP for a second consecutive season undefeated, and of course a third consecutive Big Ten championship. Welcome to the Voice of College Football, breaking down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis based on your participation. Please do all those good things like the video, share the videos out on social media, subscribe. Why do you do that? Well, you don't want to miss a call-in show. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. We have sliced and diced this one from a number of angles, and now we have taken to the streets. We have asked you, our Voice of College Football community, out on Twitter, advantages for Michigan, advantages for Bama. Let's get to those Michigan advantages. Is it in trench play, trench warfare, offensive line play? Michigan, the Joe Moore Award-winning football team, 2 consecutive years, 2021 and 22, against that Alabama defensive front. So we asked you to weigh in on your opinion there. With 167 votes cast, line play is Michigan's biggest advantage, according to 31% of you. And again, that is on the offensive side. That's on the defensive side, as Michigan is number 1 in scoring defense and top 5 in just about every metric, especially those physical metrics on a defense against Alabama's offensive line that struggled early in the season, especially with Caden Proctor at left tackle, the true freshman 5-star, but he has played extremely well down the stretch. More Michigan advantages possibly against Bama would be their consistent performance, and what I was going for here, consistent dominance from Michigan. They didn't dominate Ohio State. They didn't dominate Penn State. They had a pretty rough time in a 1-touchdown win on the road against Maryland late in the season. However, everyone else, they dominated. They dominated everyone they were supposed to. They had one of the greatest scoring differentials in college football. And of course, Big Ten championship game winners over Iowa 26-0. more consistent play from week 1 all the way through the first weekend of December out of Michigan. But out of Bama, of course, struggling against Texas. They lose by 10 at home against the ultra-talented Texas team. We know about Texas, and we'll talk more Texas-Washington later in the week. And the South Florida effort is the one that everyone points to as the very nadir of the Alabama season. 3-3 ball game in the fourth quarter. They win 17-3. Jalen Milroe did not play, but that seems like ancient history. But in recent weeks, Bama did struggle. A few weeks later against Arkansas, barely hung on with a 4-minute drive late to seal it over the Hogs at home, a bad Arkansas 4-8 team. And then, of course, 4th and 31 needed on the miracle play. Jalen Milroe and Isaiah Bond pulled it off against Auburn on the Plains. And so Bama not nearly as consistent or consistently dominant as Michigan. Over 12% of you believe that Michigan's consistent play will be an advantage over the Crimson Tide. Also, the running game of Michigan, not nearly as dominant as it's been with Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum in 21, with Corum and Donovan Edwards in 22. Donovan Edwards, of course, taking over for the injured Blake Corum, was a wrecking crew throughout the late season games, Illinois, Ohio State, the Big Ten Championship game, and the playoff. Donovan Edwards silent this season on the ground, has been more of a weapon through the air, and Blake Corum averaging 1.2 yards less per carry than he did last season, but did lead the country in touchdowns this year with 24. So the Michigan running game, over 21% of you believe that's an advantage for the Wolverines. And then there's motivation. Michigan has lost 2 consecutive playoff games. They have not shown the ability outside of the Big Ten to win big games, clutch situations, big opponents on the big stage. So motivation on the side of Michigan, according to about a third of you. Now, what about the Alabama possible advantages over Michigan? And I got to admit, they were much easier to come up with these advantages on the Alabama side for obvious reasons. And the first one right here, coaching, playoff prep. Nick Saban's the greatest of all time. Few would argue that. Jim Harbaugh, extremely capable, has performed his magic on multiple levels, the NFL stage, going to a Super Bowl, multiple NFC championship games, 3 of them. No one's going to argue the resume. I certainly was defending this guy when many Michigan fans wanted him on the streets in 2020. So, excellent football coach. However, the postseason record is dismal. Dismal. For Jim Harbaugh, we know it. Since defeating Florida after the 2015 season, it's been all L's for Michigan in the postseason, and college football playoff losses the last 2 years against Georgia and TCU. While Nick Saban, it has taken a gargantuan, Herculean-type effort to defeat a Nick Saban team in the playoffs. Just look at it. Either he wins a national championship, or it takes the likes of 2021 Georgia defense, an all-time great defense, or it takes Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson-led Clemson teams, or it takes that Ohio State team with the Bosa's and Zeke Elliott and Michael Thomas and all those NFL players, just a loaded NFL roster, and Urban Meyer in his own right, one of the greatest of all time, to win that game. And so you really have to point to a great all-time effort to defeat a Nick Saban team in the playoffs. That's all there is to it. He's been that good. So most of you thought that to be the advantage for Bama over Michigan. Nick Saban with a month to prepare. How about the sheer talent? Alabama's arguably the most talented team in college football. Michigan, according to the 247 Sports Composite, is 14th. No team has ever won a national championship in the playoff era, and even going into the BCS era with a outside the top 10 talent quotient. Deshaun Watson and Clemson at number 9, Trevor Lawrence and Clemson at number 6, with historic quarterbacks, legacy great quarterbacks, were able to lead Clemson and get past that talent gap. But you generally need a top 3 or 4 team in the country in terms of talent. Now, the one possible difference could be we are in the era of the transfer portal, and Michigan has built much of its roster and its starting roster, especially on the offensive line, with transfers. That could be the difference. But for 35% of you, you said sheer talent is a Bama advantage over Michigan. And then finally, Jalen Milroe and the athleticism. Not that Michigan doesn't have a fast, talented defense. And I got to say that these cornerback tandems at Michigan with Will Johnson and Mike Sanderstill, and Alabama with Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold, I believe are the two best quarterback tandems in college football. But Jalen Milroe's got a gun, and he also is so accurate. It's almost like the further he throws the ball downfield, the better. But in recent weeks, now he's gained that reputation, but in recent weeks, look at the Georgia game, through the intermediate pass well downfield, in addition to the deep throw. And then, of course, it's just the athleticism. Name the most athletic quarterback Michigan's defense has faced. I think it's Gavin Wimsatt, and he is no Jalen Milroe. He is an exceptional athlete. He is long and lean and tough and big and Cam Newton-esque. 20% of you roughly agreed with that statement. Michigan, again, roughly a 2-point favorite, 1.5 according to pretty much the consensus Vegas line right now, leading into the Rose Bowl 5 days from now. Your thoughts below on the poll that we're taking. If you would like to take part, it's on Twitter. Just follow me at MarkRogersTV. Leave those comments below right here at the Voice of College Football. Two schools, two programs, two teams, two traditions, virtually unmatched in the history of college football. Alabama, Michigan. Welcome to the Voice of College Football, breaking down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. Check out our previous video. We will leave it down in the comment section. Looking at the series history between the two Titans, with Alabama leading that 5-game series at 3-2. Also coming up, we will look at these two particular teams in 2023 and the matchup between Bama and Michigan statistically. Now let's look at the history of these two giants, storied programs from an all-time perspective, and then we will look a little bit closer to the year 2023. Michigan leads in all-time wins, of course, passing the 1,000 win mark this season. 1,002 wins for the Wolverines at 733. That's a winning percentage. That's number 3 in the history of college football. Alabama stands one rung higher than Michigan at 734. So these two programs are two of the top 3 winners in all of college football history. Bama's got the 18 national championships. That's number 1 all time. And Michigan's at number 2 with 11 national championships. We've got conference championships where Bama's got 34 SEC championships. Michigan at 45 in the Big Ten. Bowl games, Alabama's played in more than any school in the nation with 76. Michigan's played 50. Let's also consider that in the Big Ten before 1975, there was only one team allowed to go to bowl competitions. So even the second-place team could not go play in a bowl game. So Big Ten teams have lower bowl totals all time. There we see the bowl record. Alabama's played well in the postseason throughout history at 45-27, 3 ties. Michigan at 21-29, and of course a rough go recently under Jim Harbaugh, losing all of its bowl games since 2016. 84 consensus All-Americans for Bama. Michigan with 87 consensus All-Americans. Those are two of the top 4 figures in all of college football. Heisman winners, Michigan with 3. The last one was Charles Woodson in 1997. Bama with 4. And then we've got the NFL draft selections. Look at that. They are currently tied, even though we will run through more recent data where Alabama's been dominant. But all time, the numbers stack up at 401 and 401. So that's a top 5 finish for both of those schools. We've got 79 first-round picks for Bama. That's number 3 all-time. Michigan's at number 7 with 51. And then weeks in the AP poll. Michigan is number 2 all-time with 918. Bama's in the top 4. But look at the number 1 rankings for Alabama all-time. They are in first place with number 1 AP rankings, 140 weeks. Michigan down at number 13 with 35 weeks at number 1 all-time. So that's a look at the history of college football, back when they wore leather helmets and black and white pictures and the whole deal. We could have used any parameters, but of course we wanted to look at the all-time rankings. Every game counts, every championship, everything. Also, keep in mind here at the Voice of College Football during the off-season, we go through our all-time program rankings each and every off-season. We will do that again this year. Now we can take a second measurement. We could take all sorts of measurements, and we will look at, of course, the 2023 editions of Alabama and Michigan. We could go through, let's say, the college football playoff era of the last 10 years. We could do 20 years, 50 years, 75 years, any measurement that you would like, and you are certainly welcome to do that. But with limited resources and time, we will take one other look at these two programs more recently in modern history. Let's take the 21st century, and let's look at Alabama versus Michigan since the year 2000. The Alabama head coaches during this time started off with Mike Dubose, who had a 4-year stay with the Crimson Tide, the final year in the year of 2000. Dennis Franchione, 2 seasons there in 2001 and 2002. Mike Price was supposed to be the head coach, and technically was, but coached no games. Mike Shula, and then on to Nick Saban, of course, who has been there in Tuscaloosa since the year of 2007, coming in from LSU, then the Miami Dolphins. So since the year 2000, Alabama has won 78.8% of its games. That's 252 wins, 68 losses. Those coaches that I mentioned prior to Nick Saban, 46 wins, 40 losses. Nick Saban is 206-28. That is an 88% winning percentage. Wow. On the Michigan side, you have Lloyd Carr, who won a national championship in 1997, guiding the Michigan Wolverines through the 2007 season. Then you had the hiring of Rich Rodriguez, followed by Brady Hoke, and then Jim Harbaugh in 2015. Harbaugh has won 87 ball games at Michigan, 25 losses. That's a winning percentage of .777 that has been boosted, obviously, by these last 3 seasons in going 12-2, 13-1, and the current standing at 13-0. Other Michigan coaches, 119 wins, 70 losses. That brings the Michigan total to 206 wins and 95 losses during this century. That's a .684 winning percentage, about 10 percentage points behind Alabama. Conference championships since the year 2000. Bama's got 9, Michigan 6, 4 of those outright. Bama, all 9 conference championships have been outright in the SEC since the year 2000 because the SEC has played a conference championship game, and the Big Ten started its conference championship game in the year 2011. Look at top 25 finishes in the AP. Bama's got 17 this century, Michigan 15. Now the Tide starts to differentiate the level of play past that. Go to top 10 finishes. Bama 16, Michigan 5 since 2000. Top 5 finishes, that's Bama 10 and Michigan 2. And you guessed it, those two coming in the last 2 seasons. And they will have another top 5 finish, of course, coming up here in 2023, regardless of what happens in the playoffs. National championships, Bama and Nick Saban with 6. Michigan with none. Their last under Lloyd Carr in 97 in the college football playoff. Michigan enters for a 3rd straight year. They're 0-2 in the playoffs, losing to Georgia and TCU the last 2 years. Bama with those national championships, and during the college football playoff era, they've won the title in 2015, 17, and 20. They are 9-4 in the college football playoff. Let's go to bowl games. Since the year 2000, Bama's 18-8. And Michigan's 5-14 in the postseason. Major bowl games. Bama, another strong showing at 14-6. Michigan at 1-7. That one win under Brady Hoke in the 2011 Sugar Bowl over Virginia Tech. Heisman trophies. Neither school is going to win one here in 2023. Bama leads that comparison. And in the NFL draft, Bama with 152 selections. Michigan 115 total since the year 2000. And if we look at the first round, we've got Bama 46 and Michigan 19. So we can draw all sorts of conclusions from those numbers. It's obviously been the gold standard there in Tuscaloosa since Nick Saban showed up in the year 2007. For Michigan, it's been generally a good football program with a 68% winning percentage, but upped by Jim Harbaugh's years there since 2015. And of course, this is the best Michigan football we've seen over the last 3 seasons since going back to the late 90s, 1997, or probably even before that, looking to the late 80s and the early 90s when Michigan was the top team and top program in the Big Ten. Leave your comments down below. Comparing Alabama and Michigan, fun exercise. Again, we could slice it up going back to 1970, 1990. Pick your year, but we decided to go with this century right here at the Voice of College Football. Nelson Hubble on the line. Maize and Blue review. Always enjoy Nelson stopping by, breaking Michigan football down for us. Nelson, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before we get to the matchup against Alabama, good news for Michigan football going forward.
Yep.
Of course, this program has done an exceptional job in the transfer portal, offensive line in particular. Josh Preeb, a really strong commit from Northwestern.
Yeah, he's got 28 starts. He's nearing 2,000 snaps on his career. So he's a veteran O-lineman for Northwestern. He's he's got third team all conference this past season. So he's playing really well. And for a team that they're building something in Northwestern, and it's kind of funny. I went, and I saw that commitment. And it's Rose Bowl week. I went and dug into my closet and found this Northwestern Rose Bowl hat from.
Oh, okay, nice.
It was.
I didn't notice that.
It was my grandfather's hat, and he's from Illinois and Chicago. Actually, he's from Chicago proper. So he gave it to me, and so I just had to dig it out for the show.
I appreciate that. Way to put a little class, a little angle on it, little narrative for us. Josh Preeb started at least 9 games, 3 consecutive years for Northwestern. Mm-hmm. You put us at 28 there. And I also have to think, with everything that team went through, which I consider to be the best story in college football, for them to go 8-5, win a bowl game after what was forecasted, I got to think is a great culture fit from a guy that's obviously faced adversity, hung in there, stayed with the program, had all sorts of options to do something like this last year, bail and go somewhere else, stuck it out, built something, and had a successful season. So another offensive line addition to Michigan football going forward. The transfer portal has been kind to Michigan, especially at that position. All right, Nelson, we're getting down to the nitty gritty here, and the Vegas line is pretty much staying steady at 1.5 to 2 points in Michigan's favor. The over/under win point total has dropped somewhat, so the defensive play has been given a lot of respect for these two particular teams. A lot made out of when we've got 4 weeks to dissect the matchup of what the key matchups are, but I'm going to give you a number one shot at what is paramount to you. So if you could look at a box score today, if we could hand you magically a box score from January 1st and cover everything up, what would you want to see?
I think if you're looking for Michigan to win, what you're going to be watching box score wise is JJ McCarthy north of 250 plus yards passing, or somewhere between 50 to 100 yards rushing on the ground. And I think that's the X factor in this game on Michigan's offensive side of things is McCarthy being healthy finally. That's a little note that, is starting to sort of be talked about now, is that he wasn't healthy since the middle of the Penn State game, basically, or going into that. And so now that he's back healthy, the running game there, which they haven't used all season, the quarterback running game, they just haven't needed it. And then he gets hurt, around that stretch of the season where you think, hey, that's going to be where they're going to pull that wrinkle out. And then he's hurt, he's got an ankle injury. So now he's getting back to full health, or he is at full health, and you have that option on the table. And it's a wrinkle Alabama hasn't seen all season on tape. It's their last year, quite a bit more than this year. And so that could be something, and I think, is a huge X factor for Michigan. I think you're going to also want to look at, third down conversion rate. maybe fourth down conversion rate. Now Alabama doesn't go for it much on fourth down. They've only tried 6 times, but I think they've hit on 4 or 5 of them. I think it was 5 because they're good for top in the nation in fourth down conversion rate. Only 6 tries. Michigan was somewhere near. I've got this written down somewhere. 19 attempts for Michigan, and they're at 79%, number 6 in the country. So you're trying much more, almost over 3 times as many times at third down or at fourth down conversions, but they're converting at a similar rate. Alabama's at 83.38, which was good for number 1. So that's an interesting stat to think about because both these teams are going to want to have that ball control offense. And they're Alabama will take their shots downfield a little bit more than Michigan has this year, but they're both pretty comfortable with playing their style and plotting their way down the field, especially Michigan. So conversion rates on third and fourth down, I think, will be huge determining factors. The turnover differential, I mean, you look at Michigan this season, turnover margins plus 18. That's number 2 in the country. Alabama's plus 8. That's 20. And so Michigan's got the edge there, and I think Michigan's defense has been more, they've been able to force more turnovers, and Alabama's offense has turned it over a little bit more than Michigan's offense. So some interesting factors there. Penalties too. Michigan averages about 3 less penalties per game. They're up near the tops in the country. Bama's sort of in the middle of the pack, which, that is what that is. But, or actually, Bama's at 61. I guess that's technically middle of the pack for FBS. But so, these are some things that I think are defining factors in the game. And I think Michigan's defense is going to be faced with a huge task, obviously, as everyone's talked about. But the more I've watched the film, the more I've dug into it. I think Milroe has been a seriously improved quarterback. I'm curious to see how bowl prep had any effect on that. But he still struggled, especially their offensive line has struggled against good teams. In the last half of the season or the last 5 or 6 games, they averaged less than half the sacks that they'd given up throughout the course of the other 7. And so, their offensive line has been better as of late, but then they go play Georgia, one of the better lines that they've seen in the final 4 or 5 weeks of the year, and they give up 4 sacks. And Milroe's completion percentage is sub 55, and he was struggling passing the ball. But he made the plays, and I think that's the difference. He hasn't turned it over nearly as much, and he's made the winning plays. So can Michigan force Milroe to turn it over once or twice? And I think, my prediction is that's going to be the deciding factor late in the game is a forced turnover one way or the other.
Folks, I'm going to unashamedly point you toward a video that we produced about a week ago, and I'll put it in the comments section where we matched up everything conceivable in regards to, the Michigan rushing offense versus the Alabama rush defense, and then went into the performances for both of those units against the best opponents on the schedule in those categories. And obviously, Michigan's schedule is so lopsided on both ends of the spectrum, especially going up against top defenses in Ohio State, Penn State, and Iowa. They went up against 3 of the top 5 defenses in the country statistically. Rutgers and Maryland also were top 25 defenses in the country. Then they also had this run of low-level offenses that they faced with Iowa, Rutgers, Minnesota, Michigan State, etc. So we really dove into the analytics concerning the better teams on the schedule and the better teams in those categories. So folks, check that out. Yeah, Jalen Milroe, the best I could do was Gavin Wimsatt in regards to a mobile quarterback that could threaten possibly the defense in regards to something Michigan has faced as opposed to Alabama. I got to think from an athletic standpoint, fairly comfortable with seeing a J.J. McCarthy, KJ Jefferson, Jaden Daniels come to mind in particular in terms of mobile dynamic quarterbacks that Alabama's faced.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're hitting the nail on the head there. And if this was flipped and if it was Michigan with Bama's schedule and, Milroe and Alabama were in the Big Ten, we'd be saying, oh, Michigan's, fully prepared to face a quarterback like this. They've seen it. They just haven't this year. And Wimsatt, he's an improving quarterback, but the threat he has on the ground has sort of been very minimal a lot of times this season. He's had some breakout games and with design runs and stuff like that, but Milroe is a different animal when it comes to his capabilities on the ground, and as a passer, even better than Wimsatt in that case as well. So Michigan hasn't seen it yet. They will be tested for sure, but I'm curious to see what wrinkles they pull out on defense as well. I'm looking for Junior Colson to maybe be a spy. The big thing there with Colson is he's been having basically clubs on each hand that he's been playing with for the last good chunk of the season. And in practice so far, he's been practicing with tape and a soft cast on one hand, tape on another hand. But basically what he said lately is he's expecting to have some sort of club, bandage, something going on there. So if he's the spy and Milroe is a strong quarterback, you're going to have to make some tackles here in open space. And Colson is the leading tackler for Michigan, but it's not going to be an easy task defending the run, especially with Milroe and the option there. So defense is going to have to keep their gap integrity, keep their eyes honest, and play hard to the football. But it's easier said than done with a quarterback who's a true dual threat like Milroe is.
Yeah, and he can really air it out. He's got one of the best arms in the country, and not just it looks pretty being thrown down the field 70 yards when he's got shorts on. He's accurate throwing the ball that far downfield. I think he's improved his intermediate game as well. For a while, it was all or nothing. I'm going to take off and run, or I'm going to throw a 40-yard shot downfield, and he's come along to a certain extent, although you note the scatter shot type of results that he had against Georgia in regards to hitting for bigger plays, but not being consistent in the passing game. And Alabama's wide receivers usually scare people. That's been their MO. But this particular group, not so much. They've been fairly consistent. It's funny that on both sides of the field, I would consider these two cornerback tandems to be the best in the country. Michigan's and Alabama's, the wide receiver cores to be good, decent, but is Michigan's wide receiver core maybe being discarded and not considered much of a factor in this game? You've got, are they going to just rely on A.J. Barner and Colston Loveland largely to produce plays downfield?
I would say they're definitely being discarded a little bit. It's definitely not talked about at all, just sort of ignored. And the thing there is Michigan does have, I wouldn't say an advantage, but they do have something about their wide receiver core that helps them a lot in games like this is they're veterans. They've got some guys. You got Cornelius Johnson, you got Roman Wilson, who have both been around the block, man, and they've played a lot of football. And so that helps. And especially having that sort of chemistry with your quarterback, being able to make plays off schedule. And I think Roman Wilson will have to do a lot of that with McCarthy. I'm curious to see that component. Now, when you look at throwing the ball downfield, it just hasn't really happened that much for Michigan. And I think they have the capability. They have the players. I'm curious to see what bowl practice brings because we're here, we're 4 days or so away from the game, right? And we haven't heard a ton, and a lot of this stuff Michigan just doesn't let out. But I'm curious to see who's performing well. I mean, who are some guys that we might see at receiver getting some time that maybe we haven't all year? And one of those guys that immediately comes to mind, someone I thought might break out this year, is Darius Clemens. And Clemens wears number 0. He's like 6'3". He's a big, strong receiver, and he runs really well. And he's an almost 5-star recruit 2 years ago now, last year, I think 2 years ago now, in the 22 cycle. So, Clemens is a guy that if he can sort of establish some playing time, at least as a deep threat downfield, man, that is an intriguing thing to think about. But Michigan just doesn't have it yet. And so I understand the sort of, tendency for people to ignore Michigan's wide receiver core. But Roman Wilson runs a 4.3 40, so he's not, a subpar athlete that we're putting out there. Cornelius Johnson is not going to jump off the screen, but he's got pretty good hands. He's a very good possession receiver, and he knows how to find the soft spots in the zone or, like I mentioned earlier, make plays off schedule. So Michigan, I think, is comfortable with what they have, partly because of that veteran leadership with those top 2 guys. Beyond that, Samaj Morgan has emerged as a gadget guy. Be curious to see if there are any drawn-up plays for him. I'd expect maybe 1 or 2. Not sure where that would come. It could just be a reverse or something like that. But yeah, Michigan, I think rightfully so, because the reputation isn't there, has had their receiver ignored. But I don't think there is any concern from the program at that position. I'd say almost none. But McKinstry, now you look at in the quarterback tandem you're talking about, out of Alabama, especially with Kool-Aid McKinstry. He is a true eraser. And so I'm curious, are they going to sort of have him follow Wilson at all? Or is it just going to be, hey, we're going to both play our sides of the field and we're just going to play it straight up, which is what I think would happen.
You brought up Samaj Morgan, and of course he broke a big return back for like 87 yards against Iowa in the Big Ten championship game, one of the best coverage units in the nation statistically, and always airtight in special teams. So if he's capable of doing that, and I think you bring up a great point, because I think that it's typical to think, well, these teams are this good, this established, these are the best players on the team. Why would they? Who wants to see a player with little reps, little experience on the field? This is not the time to do that. But like you say, it happens more often than we really fully realize in big playoff games, where after those 4 weeks of practice, the coaches are seeing things that they've known have been there the entire time, but see it confidently against their own players, which is a top unit on the other side of the field. And, it's not going to be a 25 carry game or a 12 target game, but it could be a key 1 or 2 targets for a 28-yard gain, or the combination of seeing maybe a new player featured a couple times a game in some different, of course, teams aren't going to get away. They're too good to get away from what they do, but a couple wrinkles that they've had 4 weeks to play off of some of their tendencies to self-scout, say, we seem to be obvious in doing X, Y, and Z. So we're going to create a couple plays off of this that nobody's ever seen yet.
Yeah, and I think that goes both ways for both Michigan, Alabama, any school in a bowl game. You find these things out during the month or so that you have off, and that's maybe one of the most valuable times of the season, because, like you're saying, you get to self-scout, you get to figure out these tendencies, and you also get to implement new wrinkles or work on some things that you haven't presented yet that you've wanted to sort of work into the offense or defense. And so seeing the types of players that emerge, you saw in the national championship game just a handful of years ago, Tua Tagovailoa comes in off the bench and wins Alabama the game, and that's a guy who was a true freshman at the time. And so hey, I could be wrong, but I think there's going to be someone, 1 or 2 players on both sides who have not gotten a ton of go for either team that really steps up big in this game. Offense or defense, I'm not sure. I'm thinking it's going to probably end up being receiver. And like you said, for Michigan at least, and like you said, it might just be a play here or there, but a crucial play. Someone that you end up going to in a situation where maybe you wouldn't have trusted them earlier in the year, but now you're able to draw that play up for them or take that shot downfield because you feel comfortable with the guy that you've got there. So it should be interesting. That's almost my favorite thing when you're not talking about a bowl game with stakes. Even with a game with stakes, is just to see these guys who you had no idea were going to show up, right? That's the cool thing as a fan, who some people, want to get rid of bowl games or too many bowl games. You look around and you get to see some young players, the future of your team, step up and play. And so that already in and of itself is awesome. The chance to do that in the Rose Bowl is unbelievable for some of these guys.
Yeah. No, I love it. Absolutely. And, we've got this matchup that the one intangible that's out there, and we've discussed it many times with several people, including just breaking things down myself in terms of how I look at it. I in no way want to discount Jim Harbaugh's ability to prepare a team. I think that the postseason issues can be not completely excused in any such way. They are failings year after year. But at the same time, this is a guy that turned around a Stanford program, coached postseason games in the NFL, coached a team in a Super Bowl that was a play away, a pass away in the end zone, away from winning the Super Bowl. So he knows how to prepare teams. I do think that there were some things that could be explained about some of those losses. But it has taken a monumental effort to beat a Nick Saban team in the postseason. It usually takes a team that we then look back on and say, wow, that's close to an all-time great team to pull it off. Although this does not seem at least at this point, maybe we'll change our mind in about 10 days, to seem to be a great Alabama team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, to beat Nick Saban in Alabama in the postseason, you look at what Georgia's done, it just makes it that much more impressive in recent memory. Now, obviously, they lost this year, but and so you're right about Jim Harbaugh. The bowl record is not there. I do agree. There's some things you can explain away, some others you can't, but that said, nonetheless, I agree. The preparation is not something I'm going to discount. What we're going to see is who really is the better team. And Michigan so far this year, when we talk about turnover differential, we talk about penalties per game. We look at those things, and Michigan's number one, or number two, excuse me. Or no, they're number one in penalties allowed penalties per game by their own team, which is less than 3. And so you look at some of these things and you think, hey, maybe Michigan is just a really well coached team, a very sound veteran team, and that's exactly what they are. Alabama, not as much. I mean, and they're very well coached. Don't get me wrong there, but the youth is definitely having some effect. Maybe the transfers that they're bringing in, it's just not the same as it has been in years past. It's not as solid of a unit on both sides of the ball, which has made me lean Michigan a little bit, just because in these big games, in these big moments, when you need to bounce back from adversity, when you need it most, I'm trusting Michigan. It's also a team I'm more familiar with covering them. And so obviously that's, that has an impact there as well. But I do think this game will be close. And I agree with you on the preparedness of both teams should be some of the best in the, probably I would make the argument based on Jim Harbaugh and Nick Saban's resume that they're going to be the two most prepared teams in the playoff, but they're going to be playing in the first round, so it'll be interesting to see, but I'm excited. And I'm also excited to see that Washington, Texas game after. That should be a great game as well.
Yeah. Michigan's been the more consistent team. I don't think there's any question about that. Really one wobbly performance to a certain extent against Maryland. Otherwise, the only close games you would expect are going to be close games against anyone in the country, against Ohio State and Penn State. Nelson Hubble, Mason Blue Review. Get on over there, check out Nelson's work. And Nelson, we always appreciate you stopping by. Do your best to enjoy the game. And we will talk to you soon. Hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you right after the ball game at some point in the ensuing days after Michigan's your hopeful win for the Wolverines moving on to a national championship game.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Absolutely.
Alabama, Michigan, college football royalty, blue bloods. They have met 5 times in their illustrious histories. This will be the game that is the most important. Welcome to the Voice of College Football, breaking down the game you all love each and every day with best discussion, debate, and analysis based on your participation. You got to be pretty old to have taken in all 5 matchups between the Tide and the Wolverines, but that would be me. Let's check them out. Let's roll through history. 1987 season, that would be the first matchup. With all the college football played, all the history, all the games played, this is one of the great things that is wrong with college football throughout the history of the sport. It took until 1987 for Bama to meet Michigan. The Wolverines pulled it out on a touchdown pass from Demetrius Brown to John Colasar with 48 seconds left to play. Michigan 28, Bama 24. Demetrius Brown had an awful day passing, 4 of 13 for 72 yards, but hit on that game winner. Jamie Morris, 23 carries for 234. Bobby Humphrey in a duel with Jamie Morris, 27 carries for $149 for the Tide, as Bama scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to take that 3-point lead, but Michigan closed it down in the final minute to finish at 8-4, Bama at 7-5. It would be 9 years before these two would match up once again. New Year's Day, the Outback Bowl. Alabama coming off an SEC championship game loss to Florida, who would march on to the national championship with a win in the Sugar Bowl. Michigan with a down season, but it ended well with an upset win over Ohio State. It was a defensive battle with Michigan leading 6-3 in the fourth quarter before Dwayne Rudd took off 88 yards with a pick 6. Brian Gracie threw for 287 yards for the Maize and Blue as Michigan outgained Bama 415 to 247, but Sean Alexander had a big 46-yard touchdown run as Bama squeaked by Michigan 17-14. The Tide finished at 10-3, the Wolverines at 8-4. Now to the most famous of the 5 matchups between Bama and Michigan. New Year's Day 2000 at the Orange Bowl in Miami. The GOAT, before he was the GOAT, making one of his first GOAT appearances as Michigan and Bama waged a scoring fest down to the wire. Number 5 versus number 8. Sean Alexander scored 3 touchdowns in this game and would go on to a prolific NFL career, 25 carries for 161 yards. Did I mention GOAT? Tom Brady twice led Michigan back from 2 touchdown deficits, one at 14-0, the final one at 28-14. Bama, 369 yards passing for Brady on 34-46 in his final Michigan game with 4 touchdown passes. The final one in overtime that was matched by an Alabama score, but a missed point after attempt sealed the win for Michigan as the Wolverines finished at 10-2. Bama fell to 10-3. Nick Saban against Brady Hoke sounds like less than a fair coaching matchup. It certainly didn't turn out to be a fair fight on the field to open the 2012 season as Michigan and Bama got together in Arlington, Texas at Jerry's World. In the first game ever played at the Grand Stadium, Bama raced out to a 31-0 lead behind A.J. McCarron's 2 touchdown passes and 199 yards passing. T.J. Yeldon ran for 111 yards for the Tide with a touchdown. Bama intercepted Denard Robinson twice, held the Michigan ground attack to 69 yards as Bama just pummeled Michigan 41-14. This Michigan team would finish at 8-5. Bama would march on to a national championship for a second consecutive season. Bama would miss its first college football playoff in 2019 with a down 2-loss season. That would send them to the Citrus Bowl to take on a Michigan team coming off another humbling loss against Ohio State by 4 touchdowns. Michigan led this game 16-14 at halftime as Shea Patterson threw for 233 yards total and a touchdown. Mac Jones countered with 327 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jerry Jeudy went off, 6 catches, 204 yards and a touchdown. Najee Harris with a $136 on the ground and 2 touchdowns as Bama raced back for the 35-16 Citrus Bowl win over Michigan. The Tide finished 11-2, Michigan at 9-4. Hope you enjoyed our trip down memory lane, and of course, this 6th meeting will hold so much more weight as a national championship game appearance is on the line when Bama takes on Michigan. The Wolverines are 13-0, the Tide at 12-1. Certainly the marquee matchup in this historic series. Leave your comments down below, right here at the Voice of College Football. Stephen, as you well know, when you really look at the college football playoff and it just being a 4-team playoff through this season for this 10-year era, it's the elite of college football. There are very few schools that make a regular trip, and of course, no one has made as many trips as Alabama. So this is something special when we see even a program the status of Texas making its first trip to the college football playoff. But this is almost business as usual to a certain extent. Do you get a vibe from the team in particular about this being business as usual or a special experience?
A little bit of both. It is sort of business as usual from Nick Saban's perspective, but it's also a really cool experience because a lot of players on this team, they've never been out west before. They've never been on the West Coast before. So this is different for a lot of those young men. I mean, you mentioned it, Mark, the last time Alabama was in Pasadena, California for the Rose Bowl. It was the 2009 season, the 2010 game. And one of the coaches on the staff that remembers that game is Josh Chapman, who's on the strength staff. He was on that 2009 national championship team. So he talks to the players a lot about that game and what that game meant in terms of the program. So he's one of the few remnants of that team, along with Jeff Allen, who's the head athletic trainer, the head team doctor. You know, he was on that 2009 staff that went to the national championship in Pasadena. So Alabama has a few pieces from that team on this current coaching staff, kind of giving the guys the history, giving the guys the motivation and the inspiration behind that. The last time Bama played in the Rose Bowl, of course, was the 2020 COVID season. But of course, that game was played in Arlington, Texas, at AT&T Stadium because California was shut down and on lockdown because of the COVID pandemic. So this is the first time in over a decade Alabama goes back to the Great Roses of Pasadena to play in this matchup right here. But it's business as usual for Coach Saban because he's trying to get that 8th national championship of his coaching tenure, the 7th at the University of Alabama. For a lot of these players who have never been out west before, this is a very huge opportunity for them to kind of enjoy this moment.
Stephen, I keep hearing about the close calls that Bama has experienced, the South Florida game, the Arkansas game in particular. Then, of course, most notably, the 4th and 31 miracle to pull off the game on the Plains against Auburn. I think people lose sight of, in addition to the dominance of Alabama football over the past 15 years, there have been close calls. There are going to be close calls. No team marches through a season winning every game by 25 points. There are going to be close calls. And if you look at Alabama's championship seasons from the past, they have had close calls that they have needed to pull out and not necessarily play their best. And the most recent example was the team that made it all the way to the 21 championship game and the games that they pulled off that weren't the prettiest against Auburn and LSU in particular. So do you see some of those close calls as a warning sign, major concerns, or this team has proven and shown that it can win and knows how to win?
I think it's more so this team has proven to show how it can win in different ways that it can win and win different variety of games. You go back to the 2009 season, it was a close call against South Carolina. It was a close call against Ole Miss. It was a close call against Auburn. It took 2 Terrence Cody blocked field goals to beat Tennessee. I mean, 2009 was a close call. It took a screen pass from Greg McElroy to Julio Jones to beat LSU that year. So 2009 was close calls. 2011 was close calls. You lost 9-6 to LSU in 2011. So 2012 was close calls. You got beat by Johnny Manziel, Texas A&M, 29-24 in 2012. 2015 was close calls. You suffered a 43-37 loss to Ole Miss early in the 2015 season. 2017 was close calls. You took a loss, 26-14 to Auburn in the Iron Bowl that year, but still got to the college football playoff. 2020, yes, it was perfect. You ran through the season undefeated, but there were close games in that season as well. So Alabama, in its national championship history under Coach Saban, has had some close call games. So it's nothing strange or unusual about it. This season right here, you had an ugly game against South Florida that you found a way to win. You had a tough game against Tennessee that you found a way to win. You had a tough game against Arkansas that you found a way to win. You had a tough game against Auburn and a tough game against Georgia that you found a way to win those matchups in those moments. So it speaks to the ways that Alabama can win football games. And just getting back to the toughness of understanding, look, nobody's going to just bow down to you because you roll out of bed and you're Alabama football. You're going to get everybody's best game, everybody's best matchup, but it's how you fight and it's how you persevere through that. And this team has shown the grit of the toughness and the true perseverance of those championship teams of recent years in the Saban era that found ways to win hard and to win those close matchups.
Stephen, there's so much put on Jalen Milroe to generate offense, not just throwing the football downfield. And of course, he completes passes for more chunk yardage than just about any quarterback in the country. But of course, in the running game, do they have enough from a traditional running set, whether that's Jace McClellan or the other runners, to generate a running game outside of Jalen Milroe to take some pressure off of him?
I think they do, Mark. You look at Jace McClellan, who did battle with a bit of a foot issue. He tweaked his foot, and it's been the right foot that's been kind of aggravating him. He tweaked that against Auburn in the Iron Bowl. He could have played against Georgia in the SEC title game. He did dress out. He did go through pregame warm-ups, but just for precautionary reasons of a team held him out. Coach Saban talked about he had been doing a lot of this dry land running. He is looking better day by day versus where he was at prior. I look at when they start prep here in California for the Rose Bowl, how does Jace McClellan look? If he looks good to go, then Jace will play. But behind him, you have a Roydell Williams who ran hard in the SEC championship against Georgia. And he does give you power between the tackles. He does provide shiftiness and speed on the outside. Can catch out the backfield as well. Jam Miller has given you a lot in the passing game as well as the run game. He has improved also as a pass blocker. So there's Jam Miller. And then you do have two valuable freshmen. We look at Justice Haynes, who a lot of people thought we would see more from him, or we would have seen more from him earlier in the season. We saw bits of him, but not quite the amount that we thought we would get. This will be a time where he can be unleashed more in the postseason. And then you have Richard Young, another former five-star from the state of Florida. He could see some time here in this matchup against Michigan. So we could see Jace McClellan against the Wolverines, depending upon how he looks in practice once the team arrives there in California. But if you don't see Jace, you still have Roydell Williams. You still have Jim Miller. I mean, you still have Justice Haynes and Richard Young, all four guys talented. All four guys can do different things. So there is a run game that would complement Jalen Milroe.
Stephen M. Smith, Touchdown Alabama, in my own words, is the show you need to lock in on every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right here on YouTube, 6:30 Central Time. Stephen, I believe we have most likely the two best cornerback tandems in college football in this game, on the Michigan side, on the Alabama side. I'm going to talk about the Michigan two corners and the challenge they present to these Alabama receivers. Will Johnson, Mike Sanders still. Nobody is going to necessarily confuse this Alabama wide receiver core for a vintage Bama wide receiver core. But while Michigan doesn't rely heavily on downfield passing, they're going to go to the tight end a lot. They're a lot more run-oriented than Bama. Bama, of course, the deep passing game has been integral to this team. How do you see that matchup shaking out in regards to outside threats for Bama against these Michigan corners?
This Michigan secondary is they're really good. They are really good. They generate interceptions. They create turnovers. And you got to give that coaching staff under Jim Harbaugh a lot of credit for getting this secondary to play at a high level. The big thing for Alabama and the big thing for Tommy Rees as the offensive coordinator is take the easy money when it's there. If they're not going to give you the deep passing game, take the underneath routes. Take the 10 to 15-yard passes into the boundary. Take the passes in the flat and let your playmakers make moves out there in space. You go back to the SEC championship against Georgia and even the Iron Bowl against Auburn. Auburn started off not allowing the deep passes to Jermaine Burton and Isaiah Bond until Bama started taking the underneath routes to Bond, the underneath routes to Kobe Prentice, the 10 to 15-yard passes. And then that opened up some of the deep play games where we saw Milroe hit Jermaine Burton for a 68-yard touchdown. And then Milroe hitting Isaiah Bond for the game-winning 31-yard score there on 4th and 31 at the end there. Then against Georgia for the SEC title, Georgia wasn't given the deep ball. And it was a Tommy Rees going with underneath routes to Isaiah Bond, underneath routes to Kobe Prentice, underneath routes to Kendrick Law. And that's what opened up the deep passing game eventually. So for Alabama against Michigan, if the deep play is not there, you can't afford to get impatient. You got to take the underneath routes, the plays in the flat, the wheel routes to the running back. You got to take the easy money early and then work in later on the game those deep integral routes there. So for Alabama, it's take the easy money when it's there.
Stephen, of course, Jim Harbaugh's had an exceptional run at Michigan. He's done a great job there. He has proven to be a great coach, not just at Michigan. He has taken 3 teams to NFC championship games. He's gone to a Super Bowl, come within one play of a Super Bowl championship, did a remarkable job turning around the Stanford program. So there's no question. However, at Michigan, he's had issues in the postseason. Nick Saban, on the other hand, I don't know that it's almost impossible to overstate what he has done for his entire career. But in the postseason, it has taken basically an NFL team to beat him. It has taken Trevor Lawrence and an all-time great Clemson team. It has taken that Ohio State team that if you look at their roster on both sides of the ball and just NFL greats all over the place, it has taken those kind of the Georgia historic defense from a couple of years ago. It has taken a great all-time team to beat any Nick Saban team in postseason play. I don't know if that Michigan is there. What are your thoughts about what Nick Saban has done in the postseason and just his ability to prepare a team in 4 weeks for this type of matchup?
It's remarkable because Coach Saban gets everybody on the same mindset. And not just Coach Saban, you also got to give Alabama strength staff a huge kudos, because you got to look at it, Mark. For about 2 weeks, it's nothing but the strength staff on campus, right? Because Coach Saban's out recruiting, the assistant coaches are out there recruiting. So it's the strength staff getting these players mentally focused, getting these guys physically strong with the reps there, whether it's different body parts you're working on, different speed parts you're working on, the right diet you're working on. So it's the strength staff and the nutrition staff for 2 weeks prior to that bowl prep getting really sort of ramped up there. That group of people have their eyes and hands on these players, making sure that they're doing exactly what they need to do to stay ahead of the curve there. So you got to give those guys a lot of credit. But in terms of just the X's and O's, the motivation, keeping the balance of it all, Coach Saban has done a phenomenal job. Once you reach the playoffs, getting the best out of your guys and having them with the physical edge and with the mental edge. And Mark, you're correct. It's taken an opposing team to have something special in order to beat Coach Saban, whether it's a special generational quarterback, a Trevor Lawrence, a Deshaun Watson for Clemson, whether it's a special generational defense when you talk Georgia in that 2022 championship game off the 2021, season, or whether it's just, a marquee culture that's created. We can look at the Ohio State of the world when it came 2014, with Urban Meyer. That's what's taken to beat Coach Saban. You got to be special in an area. And Michigan, it doesn't have special at the quarterback position, J.J. McCarthy. McCarthy's good, but he would kind of have to play the game of his life to sort of have that work in his favor. Blake Corum is an unbelievable running back for Michigan, but Bam would have to be completely undisciplined, and it's run gaps for that to kind of pop off there. Defensively, Michigan's got guys, and they got guys that will play in the NFL, but, are the guys from Michigan good enough for 4 quarters defensively to really just have Milroe at his worst day, and this Alabama offense at its worst day remains to be seen. But that's going to be the thing with Michigan. Can they pull out something special in Pasadena under Jim Harbaugh, who has been unbelievable at creating a culture wherever he's been? He's created a culture of toughness, of hard hat, of get after you. And can he do it special enough here in this game against Alabama to pull this one out?
So, Stephen, of course, while Nick Saban and his staff has prepared this team for the last month for the biggest game of their lives, or at least in the last 2 years, they have had to put together a recruiting run here for the 2024 class. So it's been another great haul by the Alabama Crimson Tide, I believe rated number 2, according to 247 Sports and the other services. Just your thoughts about some of the guys that stand out to you.
Love the character of this group of kids. I mean, you signed 23 guys in this class. Several of them were on campus early to help with bowl prep. It may not wow you, the star rating, but the toughness of this group of men that Alabama's brought in, it is something to see. You got a 5-star quarterback in Jillian Sand from Carlsbad High School in California. This young man gets it. I mean, the spin, the way the ball spins off his hand, it's something nice to see. And he's coming to bowl prep, impressing the coaching staff, impressing the quarterback room. He's got receivers like, whoa. this is the guy that's going to be here for the next 4. Whoa, like Julian saying something. What I want to see more from him, though, is when he escapes the pocket, does he have the wheels of a Bryce Young, of a Jalen Milroe? Because the creativity with the arm talent's there. Does he have the wheels to escape when things get bad there in that pocket? That's what I want to see more there from Julian saying, but there's a lot to like there. The one that shocked me the most, Mark, when you flipped Kevin Riley from Miami to Alabama, this young man from Tuscaloosa County High School, right just across the bridge here in Northport from Tuscaloosa. When you watch this kid, Mark, Kenyon Drake speed, the dude can fly. He can pop out of the backfield. He can pop out in the perimeter. He can break. There's no use arm tackling this guy. He's got strength as well, can catch the ball out the backfield. You can put him as a kickoff returner. You can put him as a punt returner. This guy's got next level type of speed. And to be able to flip him from Miami to keep him at home in Tuscaloosa, this is a big deal. The question will be is how early can he get on the field, because he's battling a lot there in that running back room. You talk about Jam Miller coming back, Justice Haynes coming back, Richard Young coming back. It's going to be fun to see how does he fit here, in this room. But I really like Kevin Riley. Another guy, Justin Okenrokwo, linebacker from Germany. If he was playing in the States, he would be a 5-star. But because he's overseas, he's a 3-star guy. He's already got the height and the size to be an inside linebacker right now at 6'3", 215 pounds. Now, Coach Saban and his staff will get him around 225, 230, but the ability to shoot the gaps, the lateral quickness, the downhill thumping ability, I mean, he's got it. He runs a verified 4.37 to 4.40. The kid can fly. I really like Okenrokwo. And then from a defensive back perspective, Xavier Brown, when I watch his tape, that is Patrick Surtain type tape. Mirroring the receiver, playing the ball, staying in phase, just perfect technique, whether he's in man coverage, press man, off man, zone, bodying up, he can do it all. Really elite footwork. Really like what Xavier Brown brings.
Stephen, I was on Twitter the other day, and all of a sudden I hear this recreation of the kick six, courtesy Stephen M. Smith. It was on the Paul Feinbaum show. It was remarkable. Stephen, that was a thing of beauty. I enjoyed it. I played it a few different times. Where can people find that?
They can actually find that on Twitter there. I think I linked that to my profile, which is at Coaching M. Smith. If they can't find that on Twitter, they can definitely go back and watch the Paul Feinbaum show from December 15th, because I think he played that quite a few times on the show this December 15th. So I've actually been working on this whole Eli Gold impersonation for quite the time there. So I know Eli had a phenomenal bounce back from beating cancer here. But if there was ever a moment where he chooses to walk away from Crimson Tide Sports Network, from being the voice of Alabama football, I'm only a phone call away, Mr. Gold. I'm only a phone call away to fill in that role there.
Stephen M. Smith, the one and only. In my own words, that's the show, folks. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right here on YouTube at 6:30 Central. Touchdown Alabama, of course. Stephen, it's always a good time. Great to see you. Glad that you've enjoyed the holidays, and enjoy, of course, another Rose Bowl game, college football playoff, 2 Titans, Bama and Michigan. Should be a great one. We will talk to you soon, sir.
Absolutely, Mark. I appreciate it. You take care.